Buongiorno a tutti, ben ritrovati. Io sono Grazia
Good
Cavanna, senza
morning.
mascherina oggi,
Welcome
e
back. My
farò
name is
invece
Grazia
Ilaria Sassani per
Cavanna,
commentare
and I
la
will be
giornata
your
la giornata e
chairwoman for
l'ultima
today
realtà della mattinata di domani.
and also for the first half of
Aspettiamo
tomorrow
che
morning.
i vari partecipanti entrino. Intanto
Now
condivido
we wait
la
a little bit so
presentazione
that all the attendees can
diciamo
get connected to
introduttiva
Zoom. I will share my
della giornata di ieri.
screen.
Con qualche indicazione tecnica che
I
sicuramente
would like to
avrete
start with
imparato insomma,
some
già dall'esperienza
technical
dell'ultimo anno, ma dalla
instructions,
giornata di
and
ieri.
for sure you are
Per
fully
partecipare c'è
aware
la
of how to
necessità
use
dell'utilizzo
Zoom,
di
but
interpretazione
just
simultanea
a
in
quick
lingua
reminder,
inglese.
if you need
C'è l'icona
the
con il globo
simultaneous
con
translation service
l'interpretazione
in
interpretation,
English, you can
dove
click
potete
on the
selezionare la
icon,
lingua
you see
inglese
interpretation on
e
the globe
poi diciamo
icon in the
silenziare
toolbar. You
l'audio
can
originale
then
in modo tale
select
da sentire con più
English and
chiarezza
mute the
Elisa la nostra
original audio
traduttrice
so that you can listen to
che
the
farà la simultanea
English
per noi anche
voice.
quest'oggi.
And
Poi vedete l'icona
and
domande
then
e risposte,
you can see
DNR oppure
in the
Q&A,
toolbar the
e cliccando
DNR
su
or
questa icona
Q&A
avrete la
icon.
possibilità
This
di
is for
formulare le
question and
domande
answers. By
che vi
clicking
verranno in
on
mente
this
durante gli interventi
icon,
e che
you
poi io
can
a
write
voce
down
riporterò
your
ai relatori nei
questions,
momenti
and then I
diciamo,
will
scelti per questo
ask
scopo.
the
Invece
questions that
nell'icona
were
chattare,
written to the relevant
vi chiedo
speaker.
di non mettere le domande per i relatori,
I kindly
ma
ask
è
you to write
una
down
chat
your
dove potete
questions
fare
for speakers
commenti
only in the
sia ai
Q&A
relatori che a tutti i
icon
partecipanti,
and the Q&A
magari
chat
se
box,
avete dei
and
problemi
not in the
tecnici, non
normal
sentite bene,
chat.
non vedete la
The chat,
presentazione, cose
the
così,
traditional
potete
chat
diciamo
option is only,
comunicare attraverso l'icona chat,
to
appunto. Ecco,
communicate
vi ricordo nel fare le
technical
domande
glitches or
di
something like that.
mettere
But please,
all'inizio
when you
il
ask
nome
questions, only
o il
write
cognome
them
del
in the
relatore, affinché sia
Q&A
diretta la
box.
domanda.
And please, before your question,
Beh,
write
ieri
down
appunto
the
abbiamo
speakers you would
trattato
like to
diciamo,
ask
temi
this question.
diciamo, così
Yesterday,
introduttivi
we
sulle
dealt with
questioni
some
appunto del neorealismo
introductory
contemporaneo,
topics
e
about
appunto con approfondimento
contemporary
sui materiali tecnici, le
muralism,
questioni
and then
metodologiche e
we
diciamo l'introduzione diciamo
talked
storico-artistica
about
sul tema. Oggi
the
invece incominciamo ad entrare sulle
methods and so
questioni
on.
più
While today
tecniche,
we will
professionali,
get
diciamo, del nostro
into
mestiere
the
di restauratori e
technical
conservatori.
details
Quindi il
that
primo
are
intervento sarà
relevant
sulla
to our
caratterizzazione
job
dei
as
materiali e il loro
conservators
degrado.
and restorers. So the
Il
first
secondo sarà sul
speech will
consolidamento
be
e il terzo
about
ed ultimo intervento della
materials
giornata di Emma sarà
characterization
sulla
and
cultura.
degradation, the second speech on
Domani
consolidation
invece
treatments,
tratteremo
and the
dei degradi
third one on
biologici e il loro
cleaning.
trattamento,
While tomorrow we
e dei
will deal
primitivi.
with
L'ultima parte della
the
giornata di
control of
domani sarà dedicata alla
biodeterioration
condivisione di
and coatings and
esperienze
protection.
di
And then the
alcuni di
last
voi
part of
e
tomorrow's
partecipanti che si
session
sono, diciamo,
will be
offerti di
focusing on
raccontare il proprio
a
lavoro
round
con una breve
table
presentazione
uh,
che speriamo possa
discussing
stimolare
case studies, even
una tavola
from
rotonda
participants who
nell'ultima
decided
parte
to
di questi tre
apply and
giorni.
to
Vi ricordo
share
che
with us
qualora
their
per
experiences.
necessità non riusciate a seguire parte di questo
I would like to
webinar,
remind
state
you that
tranquilli
this
perché
webinar
le tre giornate sono
is
totalmente
also
registrate
recorded,
e le
so all the
registrazioni
three
saranno
days will be
disponibili molto
recorded,
presto, direi
and
dalla settimana prossima, e
recordings
quindi
will
potrete sempre
be
consultarle e
available
anche
starting
condividerle
from
con i
next
tanti che non
week.
sono riusciti a
And so
partecipare.
you can always download
Vi
them and
ricordo
even
inoltre
share
che
them
ci
with the
sarà un altro
attendees
evento
and
legato al progetto
participants
Campus
who were
a
not
giugno, nella
able
prima settimana
to
di giugno.
participate in this
Non
event.
vi
And
dico
then I would
molto
like to
altro
remind you
perché
that there
soltanto che
is
appunto
another event
si
related to the
condivideranno,
Capus
diciamo,
project at
i
the beginning of
risultati
June.
dei lavori di tutti
We
i
are going
partner
to share the outcomes
che
and
presto sarà,
results of
diciamo,
all
saranno
the
dati tutti i
partners,
dettagli, quindi vi
and we
consiglio di
will
seguire non
give
solo i
you
canali social e la
new
newsletter di Cesma
details very
7, ma
soon.
anche
So
di
please follow us
consultare
on
i canali
social
social e il
media
sito
and the
web del
newsletter, and
Campus
visit
Project
and
per
browse
essere
our
informati su questo evento
website on the Capus
e altri
Project
contenuti che
website, so
saranno resi
that you can
pubblici.
be uh,
Appunto ringraziamo ovviamente tutti i
update with
partner
the
perché
new
i
information. We
contenuti
would
di
like
questi tre
to
giorni sono
thank
anche
all the
ovviamente merito del
partners,
lavoro di
all
tutti
the
e
Capus
poi
partners,
nell'evento finale
because of
avrete
course
occasione di sentire anche la
we are
voce
now sharing
di
the
buona parte di loro
outcomes. I
e
mean, we are now
ovviamente anche
sharing
tutte
the
le
information, the
collaborazioni diciamo
knowledge coming
esterne
from the work
tra cui
that was
l'Università di Ca'
carried out
Foscari di
with
Venezia,
all the
l'Università di
partners,
Parma
and
e
a special
l'Università di
thanks to
Ghent che hanno
the Ca'
collaborato
Foscari University, University of Parma, and Ghent University,
al lavoro di Capus e infine a
which
tutte diciamo, le
contributed to
realtà che
Kappa's work,
sono
and
state
of course a
complici
special
del
thanks
nostro
to
lavoro.
all the other bodies and institutions.
Ehm, Bene, il primo intervento, il primo contributo di
So
questa
the
mattina
first speech
tratterà del comportamento e del
today
degrado dei materiali
will
utilizzati nei murali
focus
contemporanei
on
e delle
materials
metodologie di
characterization and
caratterizzazione dei
degradation.
materiali e dei prodotti del loro degrado. Sarà presentato da Michela Berzioli e da
We
Ilaria
will
Saccani.
have Michela
Michela
Berzioli
Berzioli
and
è
Ilaria
laureata in Scienze
Saccani. Michela
Pedagoglie Culturali
Berzioli
presso l'Università di
was
Parma, ha
graduated in
conseguito il titolo di dottore
Sciences
di
for
ricerca
Cultural
in Scienze
Heritage at the
Chimiche,
University of
lavora attualmente
Parma.
presso
She
Antares,
obtained a
azienda che si occupa di
PhD
fornire
in
prodotti e
chemical
servizi per il
sciences. She
restauro
works
e nel
at
progetto Capus è
Antares, a
referente
company
per la stessa
providing
azienda
products and
per lo
services
studio dei
for
materiali per
restoration.
i test
And
con
in the Capus
prodotti sia di
project, she is
pullitura
the
sia di
contact person
protezione.
for Antares,
Ilaria Saccani
and to
invece
study
la
the
conoscete,
materials
visit
and
CESMA
test
7, è Conservation
both cleaning and
Scientist
protection
con
products.
formazione nell'ambito
Ilaria
del restauro
Saccani,
di
you know
dipinti su
her.
tela e
She is a
tavola.
conservation
Nel
scientist with
2006
training in
è
the
project
restoration of
manager per
paintings
CESMA
on
7
canvas and
nell'ambito
wood.
della ricerca sui
Since
materiali per il restauro
2006, she is the project
per
manager
superfici
for
contemporanei, la pulitura di
CESMA
superfici
7
policrome,
in the field
vernice,
of
vassopressore
research on
oculare ed è
restoration materials for
docente
contemporary
nei relativi
surfaces,
corsi di
cleaning of
aggiornamento.
polychrome surfaces, low molecular weight
Appunto dal
paints, and teacher
2016 è anche presidente
in
dell'associazione
refresher
e svolge
courses.
attività di
Since
docente a contatto per i
2016,
luoghi di
she
chimica
is
e in
also
accademie
president
all'Università
of the
Italiane.
association, and
È
she carries
coordinatrice del
out
CESMA
activities
7,
as
il
a
progetto
contract
europeo
lecturer for
Campus,
chemistry modules in
e passo
several
quindi a
Italian
lei la
universities.
parola
She's also coordinator for
per
the
la
European project
presentazione,
Capsus
la
for
prima
CESMA
presentazione di
7.
stamattina. Prego
And
Ilaria.
now I give the floor to Ilaria
Buongiorno
to
a tutti,
start the morning
condividerò lo
presentation.
schermo e
Good morning. I would like
per
to
cortesia di
share my
mettere tutto a posto, si
screen,
vede
and
bene.
please tell me if you
Perfetto, scusate, non è
can
partito
see it.
all'inizio. Ok. Ehm, Buongiorno a tutti. In questa relazione verranno
So,
illustrati
good
i principali
morning.
meccanismi
In
generali
this
dei materiali
pitch,
utilizzati
we
nella
will illustrate the
ristorazione,
main
che al fine di
mechanisms of
garantire che possono
degradation of the
essere usati
materials
per
used
studiare
in
la
these studied
composizione e altri
murals,
loro processi
as well as
alternativi.
the analytical
La
techniques that
corretta
can be
valutazione dello
used to
stato
study the
conservativo delle
composition
opere
of the
museale
works of
è
and
parte
their
fondamentale e
alternative
impostare un
processes.
intervento
The
rigoroso in
correct
molte delle
evaluation of the
riprodotte,
state of conservation of
ma
the works
anche è
is in
indispensabile
fact
per ovviamente
essential to be
prevedere i
able to set
meccanismi
up a rigorous
evolutivi e dei
intervention
prodotti di
in the
uso nel
choice of
corso
products to be used,
dell'esame e
and it
nel
is
in
also essential
futuro.
to foresee the
In tal
evolution of the
senso, quindi,
degradation
risulta
mechanisms over
di primaria
time and to
importanza
carry out a
correlare
correct
fenomeni
monitoring of the
rilevanti
asset under
con le
examination.
loro
So
cause,
it is
prevedendo
very important
ovviamente
to relate
anche
the
qui
phenomena
fattori
detected with
esterni.
their causes and the external factors.
Scusate, va avanti la presentazione?
Uh, the
Speriamo che non ci sono problemi. E
Presentation
poi più
is moving
generale,
alone.
si
So
iniziò
the
appunto in
general
fase
approach
preliminare
that we adopted
degli
included
incarichi
a
di ministro
preliminary
delegato che
phase,
ribadisce
uh,
l'approccio multidisciplinare che avete già
which
visto ieri e vedremo nei
stresses
dettagli
the
nelle fasi
multidisciplinary
progettuali
approach that
ed
you
è
saw
anche quello che poi è
yesterday
contenuto nelle linee
in every
guida
project phase,
che
and
sono
is the
state
one
messe a
that is
punto
included in the
con molte dei
guidelines developed
principali
as one
istituti
of the
progetto.
main results of the
La
project.
fase preliminare include degli step di
The
lavoro che avete già
preliminary
visto nelle
phase
relazioni precedenti dal
includes
punto di
different
vista
work steps that
socioculturale.
you saw
Ebbene, anche
from a,
qui sono state
social and
utilizzate per
cultural
trarre
point of
invece
view,
dei
but
dettagli
here
importanti ai fini
we
della
also
comprensione in
use
termini
them
degradativi.
to
Quindi
gather
la prima
important
ricognizione
details to
dell'opera con
understand
documentazione
the
fotografica, in
degradation
particolare
mechanisms.
rilevandone
In
tramite
particular, at the
macchinotato
beginning, there is a
fotografie le
photographic
principali sorgenti erosive.
documentation detecting
Ovviamente
the
anche
main
iniziando a
alterations,
capire quali sono le
forms,
possibili cause derivanti da fattori
in
ambientali.
order to understand
È
the
assolutamente
relevant
importantissima poi la ricerca di
environmental
archivio.
factors.
Ricerca
And
di
then it's
archivio che
very important to carry
in
out
nostro caso
a
è stata fatta
research
per vedere gli
in the
interni totale opera.
archives. And in
Nel
this
nostro
case, it
caso
was used to understand
siamo stati
how the
fortunati per
work
quanto riguarda le
was
opere di
created.
Asselo e di
In
Acciaieru
particular,
perché
for
abbiamo anche
the Aselo,
trovato non soltanto delle foto durante la realizzazione, ma
we were
anche delle
lucky
foglie
because
d'ordine dei
we
materiali.
found
E
some
quindi ovviamente
pictures
qua si ritraggono
taken during
importanti
the
dettagli per quanto
creation of the
riguarda la
work, but
preparazione del
also
muro che vedremo
some
è uno dei punti
documents,
fondamentali, sia con le
with the
sollecitazioni per la
materials
scrittura
boat. In
dell'intonaco
this
e anche la
way,
scrittura
we
del
were
primer.
able to understand
E
how
anche per
primer
ovviamente la lettura delle
was
sezioni stratigrafiche. Qui vediamo le foto
applied
di
and
Zosen
the
che
different
stende il
stratigraphic
primer
sections.
ritenendo in
Here we
carbone
see
applicato
Zosen
sotto tutta l'estensione
applying the
dell'opera.
primer on the entire surface
Ovviamente
of the
sono
work.
fondamentali anche le interviste con gli artisti, come ha
Interviews with
sottolineato
the artists
molto
are
Grazia
fundamental,
e
as
Alessandra ieri,
Grazia and
perché
Alessandra
si trovano
repeated
importanti
yesterday,
dettagli sui
because
materiali che
from
vanno
these
verificati con estrema
interviews you can
serenità.
understand, you
Abbiamo
can
anche questa
gather
frattura
important
Zoom,
information on the
autore
materials used. This
dell'epitaffio
is
e quindi
the
rimane
interview
sempre sulla
with
tomba della Enrico Violo
the
e più
artist.
grandi presso il circolo
Grande
primario.
Madre, that's
Lui
the name of the
pratica
work, the Big
dichiara
Mother.
che la preparazione
And
riguarda
the
soltanto
artist
nelle aree sotto cui verrà
says
chiuso,
that
verso
the
praticamente il resto
preparation
delle squadre.
of the surface
Verso il
is
caso
made
invece degli
only in
artisti
the area where the
Ortica Noodles
spray
che
paint
hanno una
is
modalità
applied. And then Ortica Noodles, this is
molto
another
con
artist,
grande controllo
they
del processo
uh,
creativo e del
have a
processo
different approach.
esecutivo con
They
un vero e proprio
control the
protocollo proprio
execution, they
su
control the
stencil con carta
preparation
semipolvere
phases,
che dichiarano
they
sempre che
use
effettuare una
stencils
pittura
with
sul
dusting
foto
technique,
con
and they
applicazione
always
primer
say
addirittura in
they
relazione a
apply
quella
the
che è la
primer after
caratteristica del supporto,
smoothing the
quindi un primer
plaster,
per ciascuna tipologia di
and they
supporto.
use a specific primer for every
La
type of
necessità
support of material
di
used.
definizioni
The
omogenee
need
e
to have
condivise
homogeneous
riguardanti questi
and
vari
shared
meccanismi di
definitions
degrado delle
regarding
opere
the
di alta
peculiar
urbana, ma anche
mechanisms
il
of
bisogno
degradation of
di
urban
avere una terminologia
artworks,
chiara
but also
sui
the
tecnici
need to
esecutivi
have
sul
a
materiale in
clear
generale,
terminology
è
on
stato
executive techniques
la
and
spinta che è
materials
stato
in
l'asse dorsale
general,
di progetto che
was
avete
at
già in
the
parte visto
basis of the
ieri
creation and
menzionato nelle relazioni
development
Roberto
of the
Bassetti.
project
È uno
glossary.
strumento che a
And
breve sarà
Roberto
disponibile
talked about it
in
yesterday.
inglese in versioni
This tool will
bilingue nelle
be
5
available
lingue
in
comprese
English
nel
plus the
partenariato.
five
Lo
languages
strumento
included in the
comprende
partnership.
141
This tool
definizioni ed
includes
è nato dalla prima analisi di
141
glossario
definitions and
preesistenti, da cui si è partiti per
entries, and it was
costruire
born from an
tecnici
initial
tipici di
analysis
questo
of
ambito.
pre-existing
È
glossaries
suddiviso, come potete vedere, in due
with
parti. Una
including
parte di
specific
street art,
terms in this
che è
area. It is
tutti,
divided into
comprende una
parts.
parte più
One is
generale, una
street
parte
art and graffiti.
culturale, una sulle
It
stili e
includes
una sulle
cultural,
tecniche. Poi
general, and
menzionate appunto
style
da
and
collega
techniques,
Bestetti.
as
Quella di cui ci
Roberto
occuperemo oggi invece è la
Bestetti
seconda
mentioned
parte del
yesterday,
glossario
while
di
today we will
conservazione.
focus on the second part of the glossary,
Queste due
dealing with the
sezioni, in particolare quella di
conservation.
conservazione,
These
riguardano
two sections,
entrambe
in
la
particular
protezione
this letter,
dell'ambiente e in
are
particolare la
divided
di
into
conservazione
subsections, and
hanno
in particular the
associazioni che si
conservation
rifanno
one
proprio
includes
al-
subsections
ai meccanismi degradativi,
relating
ma
to the
quali
degradation
sono per
mechanisms,
l'effetto che la
and they
causa
are
ha sul
gathered
bene.
based on the
sulla tecnica di
effects
agevolazione del
on the
materiale,
object.
perdita
For
di materiale,
example,
quindi una
there could
caduta,
be loss
alterazioni
of
biologiche,
cohesion, loss of
alterazioni chimiche.
material, optical
Questo mi
alteration,
risulta molto
chemical
importante perché
alteration, biological alteration. This is
strumento
very
deve essere
important because this
uno
tool
strumento agile per poter poi
must
essere
be
utilizzato a livello
easy
pratico.
to
E
use
infatti
in
abbiamo
everyday
sia
practice.
illustrato che
And
scritto
you
per
also have images in the
dare
glossary
una illustrazione anche delle casistiche e
so
dei
that you can
meccanismi di
immediately
riconoscimento.
understand
Una
the
volta
different
definito il linguaggio
mechanisms,
comune, sia
even
dal
from
team
a
di
visual point of view.
conservazione del centro di
Once defined
conservazione
a
del suolo
common
minerale,
language,
è
the
stato messo a punto
team,
un
the
modello di
conservation
condition
team,
report
developed a
che
model
potesse
of
non
condition
solo
report
essere utile per
that
classificare le
could
cause di
not only
degrado, ma
be
che
useful to
fosse
classify the
anche
causes
in
of
grado di
degradation,
classificare la tecnica
but
esecutiva,
also to
brevemente quel tecnico
classify the
strutturale e anche i dati
execution
derivanti dalla
technique,
campagna analitica.
the social
Infatti
cultural
questo
context,
modello
and the data from the
condiviso
analytical
e
campaign.
suddiviso in varie
So
sezioni
this
che potete
shared
poi già
model was
consultare
created. It is
nel
divided into
poster repository
sections, and you
del
can
progetto perché sono tutti
have a
poi
look at it
elencati
in the
numerosissimi
digital
esempi.
repository.
Vedete che la
You
prima
can
sezione
find
riguarda
there
la
many
tecnica, qui si
examples.
potete
You see,
vedere
the first
presentazione del titolo
section
dell'opera, tutti
refers to general data.
titoli
You have the
dell'opera,
title of the work,
artista,
the type,
materiali
the
in
artist,
generale e
the
quindi tutto
materials
diviso.
used,
L'opera, anno di esecuzione,
the year
il
of execution,
proprietario
the owner,
o appunto colui che comunque ha la custodia diciamo, del bene, le
or who is
dimensioni
in
e anche
charge
possibilmente
of
suggesti
the
sul
of
dettaglio qui c'è
managing
una
the
breve
work,
piccola foto del bene generale e anche
and you
abbastanza
have a
completa.
sizes and a picture of the work.
Segue la sezione sulla location in cui
And
si dà la
then you
situazione del
have
bene,
this
quindi
page on the
sono date le
location, so
informazioni
where the work
sul
is
contesto
located.
urbano,
You find
informazioni anche
several
sul dato
information on the
dell'esecuzione,
environment, for example,
l'orientazione
if it's an
geografica
urban area,
dell'installazione e
street,
disposizioni ambientali atmosferici.
if there is
Inoltre questa
vegetation
sezione è già
surrounding,
parte
and then
la
you see at the
descrizione della
bottom you find
sottosizione.
the social cultural
Terza
description of the
sezione dedica
context.
invece alla
The
tecnica
third
esecutiva,
section
che è divisa
relates to the execution
sottosezioni a sua
technique.
volta
You
per
have
strati.
several
Quindi
subsections,
in
and
pratica partendo dal
it is
supporto
divided into
per
layers.
poi
So you have
definire
the
se è presente un
grounding
coating,
layers,
quindi una preparazione del muro e
then
poi
you
definire
see
la
if there
tecnica
is a prime
geologica.
coating or
Ecco che
not,
qua si
and then
rappresenta una
the
multidisciplinarità
painted
del progetto
technique is
perché
defined.
delle
Here you
specificità che
can
sono
see the
rivelate nel corso della
multidisciplinary
configurazione
approach of the project,
sono,
because
diciamo, si specifica se sono dati che sono delle ipotesi,
when you
sono
fill
dati
out
tecnici
this
o derivanti
table,
da
you can
analisi. L'ultima
specify if
sezione è
these
proprio
data
quella
are
del
just
degrado.
assumptions or
E non
if
a
they
caso è
are
una di quelle alte
the
parti,
result of
perché come
analysis. And
siamo
then you have
già
the
soliti a
degradation
dire molte
table,
volte, per poter capire il
because as
degrado è
we
necessario fare
already
l'inquadramento
said, to
generale
understand the
del
type of
bene, poiché
degradation, you
ciascun
first
tale
have to
sfida anche
understand the work
a
in
definire l'inquadramento di
itself.
degrado deve
You have
rientrare da tutto il
to
resto.
have a general, an
Sono
overview.
7 le sezioni riportate,
You
sia
have
per capire
7
la cosa in dettaglio.
sections
Per ogni singola
related to
sezione
the
sono poi
glossary.
riportati i termini
Per
specifici
section, you will
delle
find the
alterazioni,
specific terms
ovviamente,
of
e
the
viene riportata anche una
alterations,
griglia
and you
semplificata
also
per
find a simplified
appunto
table
riportare sulla superficie del bene i vari
so
numeri
that you can
corrispondenti alle forme
write
decorative.
on
È
the
possibile
surface
inoltre
of the work the
dare un
relevant
colore
figures
a questi
concerning
numeri
alterations. You can
perché è
also
possibile anche
give a
definire
color
le
code
tonalità
of every number,
verde, giallo,
so that you
arancione
can
e rosso
define the
e poi
condition, how severe
viene
is the
fatta poi
condition. You
definizione
see
le misure
green,
che
yellow,
vanno a
orange,
prendere
red,
per
and then of
ogni
course they
gravità diciamo del
are
sintomo.
related and they refer to the measures you have
Vedete le
to
sezioni sono
adopt based on the severity of the
per
symptom.
coesione, scusate,
You see
perdita di materiale,
loss of
deformazioni
cohesion,
specifiche,
loss of
surface
materials,
tossica,
deformation of the
alterazione
surface,
chimica,
optical
alterazione
alteration,
biologica
chemical
e
alteration, biological
successi
alteration, and the addition of substances, other
Viene riportato
substances.
anche un rilievo grafico di
This
Oriental
is a
Carpet
graphic
di alto
survey of
sintellino,
Oriental
questo
carpet.
conserva
At the
in questo caso Popolare di Mancasale
Cooperativa
Coviolo
Case
e qui
Popolari
sono stati
Mancasale Coviolo in
inseriti
Reggio
diciamo,
Emilia.
dei vari retroscena di
Here you
strutture
find
con
different
le varie alterazioni ottiche possibili, quindi riguardano sia
mapping of
l'estereocromatica,
optical
movimento,
alterations. You see
spiadimento,
chromatic
con la
alteration,
gravità
darkness or
in modo da avere
fading,
già
and
subito
their
attuato quelle che sono
relevant
le aree
severity condition
di rischio,
degree.
ampiture
In this way, you can
interessate
immediately
da
have an
queste
idea of
alterazioni.
the situation of the
Un
degradation
altro esempio è
mechanism.
quello di
Another
un'altra casistica
example
affrontata proprio dal team CESMAR, che è quello dell'opera OSEC presso la Cappellania della
concerning
Chiesa di Reggio Emilia.
the
La
work
barriera realizzata con
carried
questi
out by
lavori
the
di tubo
Chesmar team
in tempi
is
relativamente brevi
this
rispetto alla
dalla chiesa,
realizzazione
the
è
middle
stata
school image,
completamente sbiadendo e anzi
and there was
restaurando
a
l'anno
problem of
scorso.
fading. This is a
Attualmente
picture
è
taken
finalmente
last year.
scompatta.
Right now, colors
Diciamo che
completely
come fade,
disappeared
quindi
almost
come
as a
sbiadimento e
fading
alterazione cromatica
and a
proprio
chromatic
in
alteration.
un'altra opera di Reggio
There
Emilia di
is another
Chesmar, proprio
example in Reggio
per quanto
Emilia on
riguarda
tenor
i
sacral
fumi
bird,
rosa risultano
canor.
completamente
You see the
scomparsi.
pink
Invece
colors
una rara
are
particolare
almost
è quello relativo a
they
questa
almost
casistica
disappeared. While as for the
risulta
orange in this
completamente
trait,
girato,
you
ma
see
come
that
sbiadimento.
there is a tinting, but
È
in the
possibile
meaning that
davvero
the
anche un'altra
orange
opera
got
sempre del contesto,
darker.
che è
This
quella
is another
del
work
mandala,
that is
sempre
the
qui delle case
mandala,
popolari di Mancasale Coviolo, perché
always
anche in questo
on the
caso
Case Popolari Mancasale
abbiamo
Coviolo. In this case as
un
well,
fading di molte aree, ma
we
soprattutto
have a
un'alterazione
fading of
cromatica, in particolare di
several
un
areas, and in
arancio che
particular
si trasforma
a color
in
alteration of an orange that
grigio-viola, e
turns
l'analisi Raman
into
hanno
purple
rivelato
or
come particolare
gray.
pigmento sia
And
il
the
pigment
Raman
PO34
analysis
nel
highlighted
biaggio-marrone.
the pigment
Vediamo che qui
PO34,
in un'altra opera
the
sempre del contesto
disopirazolone. We can
appunto
see it here
realizzazione,
in another
certamente è una proprietà
detail of the
strisciante che si
work.
fa, però
Here you see
completamente
at the
girato, diciamo,
moment
in
of
pochi
the
anni,
execution and
sempre
after a
appunto
few
questa opera del
years.
2010.
This
Per
is a
quanto
work dating
concerne le
back to
alterazioni strutturali,
2010.
un caso
As for
esemplificativo, scusate, è quello delle
the
Niguarda, che ieri avete già
structural
ampiamente
alteration,
visto.
you
Poi
have
vediamo
the
dal punto di vista
case
del
of the
degrado.
Niguarda mural
Gli interventi precedenti
that we discussed
hanno
yesterday.
provocato
The different
una
intervention, the
scaricatura
different actions
superficiale completamente flake, con
created this
difficile
kind of
adesione delle parti
flaking
ritoccate,
with a loss of adhesion of the
un'alterazione che
retouched
si è
parts,
in parte
and this alteration
risolta, o comunque insomma
was
è stata
partially
coperta
solved and
dalla ridipintura nel
covered
2019.
by
Invece
the
diverso è il
repainting in
caso
2019.
del blistering, delle
While
cadute e delle
different
assiagliature, però in
is
senso più profondo,
blistering and
riguardante il
loss of
supporto che troviamo
the
proprio in tutta
support and the
l'opera,
scaling
che
that
sia
we
dovuta
find
a
in the entire work.
questi blocchi di cemento
And this
che
is due
hanno
to
dei
this concrete
inerti con
bricks,
materiali di scarto, e quindi su questi ricorsano
including
tipo
inerts,
metallo o vetro, e quindi
and you
provocano
have
impatti enormi
metal
sullo
and glass
strutto.
pieces,
Quindi il supporto si è
and
rivelato
they just
non
in the
adatto a
end fall
ricevere
down. So the
appunto
support
queste
was not
caratteristiche. E ultimo
suitable
l'esempio di
to
due
receive
gradi
such
che
paint. And
ci
then we have
ricorda
this
quella
other
che parlando
example, two
del progetto Matteo
dragons.
Montanari è stata riscontrata come
And
un'alterazione biologica.
Matteo Montanari
Una patina nera
detected a
non più
biological
idonea è
alteration.
stata
So
attribuita
you
una
have
specie fungine
this patina due to
ehm,
some
che sono
fungi,
particolari
and
trattate proprio
they
da questo
probably
cemento,
indicate the
però
availability of
utilizzato
organic
con
substances
questa
on the
pigmentazione
surface of the
di due
concrete wall.
di calcestruzzo
Perhaps the use of mineral oil
che ne
for the
soltanto
detachment of the
l'esempio
concrete
più
from the
chiaro.
molds. These
Siamo
are some
quindi
examples
arrivati
of
al
degradation. So
degrado.
let's now see
Come
what
potete
are the causes
vedere,
of
dagli
degradation.
analisi che sono uno
As you
dei
can
prodotti del
see
progetto, le cause vengono
in the different documents of the
raggruppate
project,
in due macro aree
Causes are divided into macro categories. You have endogenous causes, so they are related to the constituent materials and the chemical physical properties, both for the pictorial layers and the support, and they are usually associated with the technical problems encountered during, for example, realization or some static problems. And these causes can be investigated through analysis of the constituent materials, some on-site investigation on water absorption, colorimetric analysis, and also by the use of porosimetry. Through an imaging camera, you can evaluate the changes undergone by the building, and of course this is true for buildings. And then exogenous causes, they are related to physical situation, chemical and biological and mechanical conditions. You have to consider the exposure of the work. You can use maybe data logger to detect any change in temperature or humidity, and then, for example, in case of pollutants or particulates in the area, maybe there are some production factories or site or the traffic. And then some other causes are related to the human intervention on the work. Could be maybe the fact that they are close to the road, a lack of maintenance, some wrong protection or conservation interventions. You can study the surroundings by using plans, city maps, and in particular in relation to the traffic, the passage of cars and people. Now I am at the end of my part. Now I give the floor to my colleague Michela Berzioli for the definition of the different analytical approaches. Good morning and thank you, Ilaria. I would like to share my screen as well.
Quindi ditemi se si vede.
Sì, vediamo bene.
Ok.
Yes, it is perfectly visible. Now I will briefly outline the potential and the results of the analytical techniques that have been useful to characterize degradation products. You can read this slide that will be sent to you so that you can read all the details that I cannot explain right now. One of the most important goals we set was to try and understand or at least try and assume the causes and mechanisms of degradation that we observed on works. With the data collected, we wanted to create a database to understand similar cases, thus saving the cost for future analysis and give information for restoration tests and to develop guidelines. We then started from the analysis of those phenomena of degradation, highlighted in the condition reports that raised the need for further investigation to better understand the materials involved and the potential interactions. We then selected the most suitable analytical techniques, starting from the non-invasive ones on site, and then we analyzed the samples in the laboratory. We then aged some mock-up samples that were specifically prepared to simulate the degradation mechanism. We then adopted a multi-analytical approach using different techniques that were as complementary as possible and respectful of the integrity of the works. So starting from multispectral imaging, non-invasive analysis, and analysis of the macro and micro sample. Here you can find a list of some of the most common techniques usually adopted to study public art and within the CAPSIS project. We will focus on the ones in bold character, bold font. So in particular the UV fluorescence and colorimetry. Among the analysis on micro samples that are usually the preferred ones, we will see the optical and chemical analysis on both free sample and embedded in polished section, so the so-called cross section. Now we will briefly describe every technique. We'll start from the UV fluorescence. So you irradiate a material with a UV light centered at 365 nanometers, and some substances, especially the organic ones, can release part of the absorbed energy with the emission of radiation in the visible range that can be photographed and captured. The fluorescence color depends on the chemical composition of the substances. So you obtain an image that allows you to locate materials lying on the surface and to differentiate the materials that may appear similar in color but different in composition. This is the Pigalle painting case. This technique allowed us to recognize and localize the uneven coating with the acrylic materials. It has a bluish white fluorescent color and is still degraded and a source of degradation. Colorimetry allowed us to measure the color of surfaces, and we assigned 3 values to coordinates. You see L, A, and B in the chromatic space, the CLab, and we also measured the variation, the so-called delta E. When the delta is included in the range 1 to 3, it means that the difference is not visible at human eye. So this is very useful to monitor the chromatic change during the course of life on the painted surfaces or on samples before and after the artificial aging. Here you see an image of the campaign conducted on the Ubuntu painting in Reggio Emilia, made in 2018. It was affected by a strong fading of fluorescent colors. As for fluorescent colors, the orange used in the Ubuntu painting was studied during the preparation of a university degree project in the Ca' Foscari in Venice that confirmed the light fastness. You see the number of hours of aging, 620, and 67 was measured the delta E. So here you see the Montana spray can that is classified. Here you can see the UV resistance, so less than 1 year stability, based on classification and internal tests that are not known and cannot be reproduced, but this gives an idea of the stability. And then there is a standard international classification concerning pigment used, and it is based on the chemical composition. So to every compound you have a name, the color index name, and a number. For example, titanium white, you have a PW6, so pigment white 6, and to which you can associate a stability value from 1 to 5. 1 is excellent, 5 is very poor, fugitive, and they should be measured based on the international standard ASTM. So the titanium white has an excellent stability. You can find these codes on retouch colors of different brands, but not in the spray cans we studied. Going back to the coloring agents in the fluo spray cans, they are not detectable with the classical chemical analysis, so it was not possible to identify the chemical compound. In this table, here you can see some results of paints that were studied on samples, mock-up samples. Here you see the different colors that we studied in Montana 94, one of the most important brands. And here you can see the difference of colors, delta E, that is studied. Here you can understand that the colors that are that have a lower light fastness, in particular, are the fluorescent colors, some red and oranges, including specific pigments, azoic pigments, while then you have more stable with the colors in blues and greens, and then you have the titanium white that is omnipresent, and it has a high stability to light. And then when it was necessary to take some micro samples from the work to create some mock-up samples before and after the aging, the observation under the stereo microscope was essential before submitting the samples to any other investigation. Here you see some images under stereo microscope of mock-up samples painted with the spray can Montana 94 orange. And then you can understand the characteristic of this type of film. Here you have the non-age sample and the age sample. You can understand the porosity, the homogeneity, and also the change in morphology. Let's go back to the table we saw before, and we added now the columns of the morphological changes after aging. You can see some colors are stable to light with the delta E values that are not perceivable, like cyan and purple. They undergo significant morphological changes after aging. Among the non-invasive chemical analysis on samples, you have the infrared spectroscopy, and it allows us to detect organic and inorganic compounds, as well as the class of pictorial binders, pigments and fillers, to detect chemical changes before and after aging. So you can analyze the different spectra, you can focus on the differences even in certain spectrum areas of the functional groups. So it is a molecular spectroscopic technique. The sample is irradiated with the infrared light, and then you measure the absorption at specific wavelengths by the functional groups in the molecules of the sample. This IR spectra compared refer to the Montana 94 orange sample. On the top you can see the age spectra. You see pink and purple, and you see here the comparison with the red curve, and the age samples showed a decrease in intensity of the bands of the wavelengths that can be attributed to the pigment, as if the pigment was less present on the surface. So now, going back to the same table as before, with the column of the chemical changes based on the infrared analysis, it is interesting to note that some colors that are unstable to light did not necessarily have a big chemical change, and vice versa. Finally, the analysis of the pictorial samples in a polished section was very important to study the stratigraphy of colors, and it allowed us to reconstruct the stratigraphy of works, as we usually do in the cultural heritage conservation sector. Here you see one example, H1, that at the origin was red, and it was strongly faded from the brilliant layer. You can see the red pictorial layer that is characterized by the D letter. It is covered with an altered layer, the gray color in 10 microns that we called E. And so the pictorial film was poorer, and you see that under it the color is still vivid. If we magnify the sample, so microscopy plus microprobe allowed us to investigate this phenomenon by obtaining black and white images, and we analyzed some sections. Here we see some orange paint layer at Montana 94 in section before and after the artificial aging simulating solar radiation. As you can see from the optical microscope pictures and the delta E values on the right, with aging sample has faded in a perceptible way, and in the scattering images in black and white, you see the fraction, the inorganic fraction that is white in the picture, and this has not changed. While the organic fraction, and you see the black color in the pictures, you can see it here, before aging. This organic fraction has decreased due to aging. So this can be attributed to the loss of organic azopigments. So aging also involves thinning and flattening of the pictorial film, so a morphological change as well of surfaces. The study was carried out by our partner at the Vigo University, and we thank them very much. We also investigated the section with the Raman technique. It's a molecular spectroscopic technique that relies on the interaction between a beam of light, usually a laser, and the molecules of the sample. We analyze the radiation scattered inelastically, that the molecules of the sample used to turn on or off vibration of the bonds of the molecules to obtain vibrational spectra, and they are unique to the molecules, and you see the Raman spectrum of the orange color sample H1 that we saw before. And this technique was essential to analyze the organic and inorganic samples and to better understand the degradation. This analysis was carried out by Professor Bersani at the University of Parma. By considering the sample H1 we saw before, the Raman analysis layer by layer allowed us to identify the pigment responsible for the coloration, so permanent orange 34, and titanium dioxide in the rutile form, present in the white preparation and the different pigmented layers, so the red and the gray altered layer. To better understand, we created a spectral map, so different spectra from the inside of the sample to the degraded, the outside that was degraded. Here you see the rutile, the calcite, and in the red-orange layer you see the pigment, the contribution of the pigment. That it's orange pigment 34, and when you reach the altered layer, the signs of the pigment are visible but very weak, and the rutile, even if it's always present in the pigmented layer, becomes more intense in this last layer. So a thin outer layer consists of rutile, so titanium dioxide, plus residues of the pigment 34. So the orange pigment diminished due to the interaction with light and air after photodegradation. So there is also an assumption in literature of the migration of rutile towards the outside through microcracks, and therefore generating some bleaching, but maybe this assumption is weaker. Here you see a list of colors that have been analyzed on site, so on the works in Reggio Emilia, with Raman and Steer analysis, and you see the one marked in red in the last color. So you find some orange, red and pinks, while the most stable colors are the greens, the purples and the blues. Therefore confirming the trend we detected on the aged samples. So in conclusion, the multi-analytical approach and the use of several complementary techniques allowed us to identify the constituent materials and techniques for the creation of these artworks, and to analyze the on-site samples. We were able to understand the stability of the materials and the main degradation effect, and we were able to understand, at least to have some assumptions on the degradation causes. So this was just to give you an idea of the trends we identified. So the analysis we carried out want to provide additional useful indication for restoration project and for the conservators as well. And now I'm at the end of my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
Grazie Michela.
Thank
Grazie
you,
Ilaria.
Michela. Thank you, Ilaria, for your speech.
Dunque adesso abbiamo qualche minuto per
Now
fare
we
delle
stop.
domande
No, we have some minutes for the questions to the two speakers, and I would like to start by asking,
ad Ilaria Saccani,
and I ask Ilaria,
quanto concerne i fenomeni degradativi
as for the
esaminati
degradation
urbana,
phenomena
quali
that
sono
you
quelli che possono essere considerati
detected on the
prioritari e
urban
per quale
artworks, which are the ones that can be considered as primary, as a priority, and why? We analyze both mechanical and optical causes. I mean, the degradation processes that lead to mechanical damages or to optical alterations. But indeed, the optical degradation, even if it can lead to altered interpretation, probably it's not so important as a mechanical damage.
spiega molto bene questo è quella di Niguarda. Quindi il
For
fatto che
example,
se
the
il muro è
Niguarda case
idoneo e quindi
study. I
nel
mean, if
caso
the wall is
inerti che
not
nel
suitable,
tempo
it
faranno
includes
gomitare il
inerts
muro, fanno scattare
that
grandi
over
flusso di
time
inconio,
create
questo è un task
swollen
veramente
phenomena and
importante. Quindi
therefore
ci sono degli
having
errori tecnici nella scelta
some
del
clusters
supporto, ma
detach.
anche
This is
errori esecutivi.
important.
Ad
So there
esempio,
are
quello di
mistakes
non
in
andare
the
a
choice of the
richiamare la
support, but also
muratura
in
su cui poi si
execution
frattura, quindi sicuramente in
mistakes.
un
For
eventuale
example, not
vademecum che in maniera molto
um,
cauta
cleaning the
e
support. So, in
poco
potential
sicuramente messa in
guidelines
tenuta agli artisti, sicuramente ecco, quello di
that can be
andare a
provided to
risanare il muro o
artists,
comunque
the
l'applicazione di un
fact
primer
of
idoneo, mi pare che questo possa essere uno dei punti
coating the
fondamentali da
wall with
trasferire,
a
così come
suitable
quello ovviamente
primer should be an
del
important
ricorrere
point to
a dei
convey
materiali
to
stabili.
experts. The same thing as
Ieri è
using
stata fatta una
stable
domanda che
materials.
diceva,
Yesterday we
penso
received a
delicatezza
question
Sonino sempre, se
by
c'era
Elisabetta
stato un
Sonino, I
dialogo,
think,
no, tra noi
asking if
esperti e gli
there
artisti
was
in
a
parte
conversation, a
durante le
dialogue
interviste,
between
sempre
experts
più
and
tempo fa,
artists.
vada
Yes,
considerato che quello
during
che ha avuto da
interviews, but I
pessimo
think that
giudizio
this
Giuseppe Volano è il
dialogue should be
virtuoso. Già era
um,
stato
carried out even in
addirittura
the future, and this project can
per gli
be
anni
a virtuous
90
example.
e il 2000 in America
In
con
the
le
90s, at
esperienze
the
che sono
beginning of the year
avvenute sugli
2000,
static murals,
in the US, there were case studies
ed è
and
importante quindi
experiences in
aiutare gli artisti anche
rescuing
sulla scelta
public
dei materiali.
murals, and these experiences are very important to
Grazie Ilaria.
even give indications to the
Allora,
artists
una
in
domanda
the selection of their
per
materials.
Michela
One
Berzioli.
question for Michela Berzioli.
Sonia Spinello chiede se la banca
Sonia
dati degli
Spinello
immagini
asked
dell'immagine
if the
multispettrale sarà disponibile.
imaging, the multispectral imaging
Allora,
database is
abbiamo
going to be
identificato i
available,
raccolti, sono già
or the
disponibili
gathered
appunto sul
data
sito di Capus,
already
quindi fare
available
nota
in the
potrete
CAPES
diciamo vedere
website.
tutti i
For
dati analitici
every
raccolti.
work, you can find all the analytical data that
Per quanto riguarda questo tipo
was
di
gathered.
tecnica, ecco,
As
non
for
è
this
stata,
type of
sia stata
technique,
eseguita, diciamo, appunto da noi, dal gruppo CESMAR 7 e Antares, quindi
Cesmar
diciamo non c'è
Sette and
necessità di una vera e propria banca
Antares
dati perché non
carried
abbiamo
out this
preso un
analysis,
numero
so
di dati,
we do not have a
però
specific
comunque
database for this
diciamo anche perché
type
questi
of
tipi di indagini
investigation,
sono anche molto
but
difficili da eseguire in situ. Pensate
this
che la
type
prima
of
interferometrica
investigations
appunto
are
è un
really
segnale molto
hard
debole
to
da poter rilevare e
perform
quindi
on
poi un
site.
ambiente
The
oscurato, quindi
ultraviolet
pensate
sun
alle
is
opere di
really
street
weak
art,
to
abbiamo
detect.
fatto
You
una
should be
campagna
in a
di
dark
notte
environment. So
vicino ad uno
for street
stadio
art,
cittadino,
we carried
cercando di
out
esplorare le luci dei lampioni, quindi
an
anche
overnight
non è stato
campaign trying to
un'indagine appunto
darken the light
particolarmente
post.
facile, in più poi i materiali sintetici delle nostre
So
opere
it
non si
was not
prestano
easy,
sempre
and the
benissimo a
synthetic
rispondere
materials
bene
of our
a queste
works
tecniche, ma
not
tutto quello che abbiamo
always
fatto lo trovate fruibile. Ecco, su queste indagini
meet the
una vera e propria
needs
banca
of our
dati
techniques, but
non c'è, nel
you
senso che abbiamo
will
fatto un po' di analisi più che
find
altro
some
a
data,
spot
but there is
laddove
not a
riuscivamo a
specific
farla.
database. It was more
Grazie.
random analysis where we were
Ho
able
inoltre una
to
domanda da
do
Mrinalini
it.
Mani
Rinalini
che
Mani
chiede
asked
qual è la
another question,
differenza di
and she asked,
degrado, se è
what
stato
is the
riscontrato una
difference in
differenza nel degrado
degradation
dei
in
dipinti
paintings
tra opere realizzate su muri
on
esistenti
existing walls
rispetto a opere realizzate
or walls
su supporti, diciamo,
prepared
preparati
by the
dall'artista.
artist for the painting.
Se ci sono degli
And
studi
if
comparativi, diciamo,
there
tra
are comparative
queste
studies
differenze, tra
on
queste
these
casistiche diverse.
different case
Rispondo
studies.
io, rispondi tu Michela?
Rispondi pure tu.
Ma
Okay, I
le
can answer.
casistiche prese in considerazione dal
The
progetto sono tutto
cases
sommato abbastanza limitate perché voi dovete
considered in
pensare
the
che
project are not so
tutti hanno
many.
lavorato su dipinti murali,
You have to
però
consider that not all the teams worked on
sicuramente sì,
wall
facendo
paintings.
interviste con gli artisti, faccio un
But
esempio secondo me
from
abbastanza
the
importante.
interviews with the artists,
Proprio
I
all'interno della della stessa opera a parità di
inside the
supporto,
same work
dove
with
c'è
the
applicato
same
il coating
support
e il
where
materiale,
the
scusate,
coating,
il primer,
where
non mi viene il termine, laddove c'è
the
applicato
primer
l'opera
was
in un
applied,
determinato modo, laddove
the
non è stato
work
applicato si comporta come un
had
altro. È
a
il caso proprio di
specific
tutte queste
behavior.
carte
Where the
che
primer was not applied, then you had
dalle
another
foto, oltre
behavior
alle
by
evidenze
the
di scritto
artwork.
in bianco,
Oriental carpet,
appunto
this
applicate fino a
you
una certa
see,
altezza,
well,
i
the
danni meccanici sono
white
piccolissimi,
background
quasi
was applied
nulli.
up to a
E poi
certain
qui
height, and you
chiaramente
can
c'è il
see
spray
the
sul corpo.
mechanical
E
damages, in
l'altra
particular where you
cosa
have
è
spray on plaster. And
sicuramente
another
penso
thing
all'opera
is
milanese,
the
la comparazione a
Milanese
parità anche di
work.
sito della fabbrica del
Even if you
vapore
have
tra le
the
opere del
same
Mandela
site,
e
so the
le dalla
Fabbrica del
Sade.
Vapore,
È
you
vero
see
che
the
l'opera del
difference
Mandela
in
grava di
the
più,
Mandela artwork and the
sicuramente
Dalla Sad
elementi che
works.
confermano che mentre con Mandela il muro non era stato risanato,
With
con Khaled
Mandela,
sì.
the
Quindi
wall
diciamo
was not treated. With
nel caso
Khaled,
non ci sono
yes, it
danni
was
meccanici
treated. So you
eclatanti,
do not
però c'è
have
una
any
differenza
major
notevole in
mechanical
termini di
damage, but there is a strong
conservazione di
difference
Khaled rispetto a
in terms
Mandela.
of conservation from the Khaled's
Grazie.
work
Ho
compared to
un'altra
the Mandela's
domanda
work.
indirizzata a te,
Thank
Ilaria,
you. There
da
is
Sara
another question
Penoni,
for
che
you,
chiede,
Ilaria, by Sara
che
Penoni.
osserva che nel glossario utilizzate il
She
termine
remarks
perdita di
that
coesione
in the
in
glossary
caso
you
di
use
perdita
the
di
term
adesione.
loss of
Generalmente si
cohesion
usa in
in
pitture
case of
murali, con
loss
questi
of
termini
adhesion.
identifichiamo due tipi
It
di degrado
with
differente.
the wall paintings with these two terms we usually identify two different types of degradation.
Sì, diciamo che la macro classe è unica, però
So the
poi
macro
i vari
category is the
termini
same,
sono
but
stati
then
poi
the
differenziati,
different
per cui
terms
non si
were
è creato una classe ad
differentiated.
hoc
So
per
we
la
did
perdita di
not
coesione,
create a specific
ma
class for
poi i
example, the loss of
termini
cohesion,
risultano
but then the
ben
terms uh,
differenziati.
are
Diciamo che in questo
well
caso, per quanto riguarda
differentiated.
questa
In this case,
peculiare
as
categoria di
for
dipinti,
this peculiar
non sono così
painting
frequenti le perdite
category,
di coesione come le perdite di
loss of
adesione.
cohesion is not so frequent compared to the loss of
Bene,
adhesion.
grazie.
So thank you.
Non vedo altre domande da parte dei partecipanti.
I do not see
Quindi
other
direi
questions
che
by attendees,
possiamo
so I
concederci
think
tutti una
we
pausa
can
caffè
stop for a coffee
e
break.
quindi direi che ci rivediamo
So
fra 10
we
minuti
will
per proseguire
convene
con
back in 10
i
minutes.
lavori.
We'll see you in 10 minutes.
A tra poco.
Thank you. See you soon.
Dopo.
Bentornati.
Welcome back.
Riprendiamo i
We
lavori
will resume our
con
morning session
l'intervento
with the
di Davide
speech
Ricciardi
by
e
Davide
Simone Parma
Ricciardi and
sul
Simone
consolidamento
Parma
dei
on
dipinti
the
murali
consolidation
contemporanei.
of contemporary wall paintings.
Davide Ricciardi
Davide
è membro del
Ricciardi is
consiglio
a member
direttivo
of the
del
board
CESMAR
of
7,
directors of Cesmar
lavora come
7.
restauratore a
He
Milano ed
works
è
as a
docente di
conservator
restauro dell'arte
restorer in Milan
contemporanea
and
all'Accademia
teaches
di Belle Arti di
contemporary
Brera
art
e di
restoration at the
movimentazione delle opere d'arte
Academy
all'Accademia
of
di Belle
Fine Arts
Arti
of
di
Brera
Bologna.
and at the
Simone
Academy of Fine
Parma,
Arts in Bologna.
laureando in restauro dei
Simone
materiali
Parma
lapidei presso la
was
Scuola di Restauro
graduated
dell'Accademia di
in
Belle Arti di Brera
restoration of stone
e
materials
ha
at the School of
partecipato con il
Restoration
suo
of the Academy of Fine
professore
Arts of
Davide Ricciardi al
Brera.
restauro
Sorry,
dell'opera
he
di
is
Paolo
graduating
Canevari,
and has
Il
participated
Mostro,
with his
presso il
professor,
MAP,
Professor
Museo
Ricciardi,
d'Arte
to the
Polpi
restoration of
di
the work
Milano.
of Paolo Canevari, Il
Lascio la
Mostro,
parola
at the
a
Museum
Davide
of Art
Ricciardi
Paolo
e
Pini in
Simone.
Milan. Now I give the floor to Simone.
Presento la condivisione. Ok, perfetto.
Can you see it properly?
Sì.
Perfetto. Allora, questa conversazione
This
riguarda appunto il
lecture
consolidamento dei
focuses
murali
on the consolidation of
contemporanei
contemporary
e
wall
verrà presentata
paintings
da me e da Simone Parchi,
by
che è uno dei miei studenti
myself
all'Università
and by my
di Milano.
student Simone Parma.
Per poter affrontare
In order
un'intervento di
to carry out
consolidamento
a
è
consolidation
necessario
work,
prendere in
you have
considerazione
to
alcuni aspetti.
consider, first of all, some
Intanto
aspects.
conoscere
First
i
of all, you have
materiali
to
che
know the
compongono
materials
un'opera d'arte
constituting the work
e
of art,
analizzare le cause che
and then
comportano
analyze
il
the
degrado.
degradation causes.
Ovviamente diventa importante
It
agire
is very important
sull'ambiente
to
intorno
act
all'opera prima
on the
ancora
environment
sull'opera stessa,
in the
quindi la valutazione
surroundings.
dei rischi di accettare l'oblio,
And as we
proprio
said
per
yesterday, to
eliminare le
accept the oblivion
cause,
in order to
attenuare le
mitigate
cause che
the
hanno portato al degrado
degradation
e
factors
rendere
and
l'intervento
to
più
make our
efficace.
intervention
Poi
more
chiaramente bisogna
effective.
conoscere anche i
And then you have
prodotti a
to know the
disposizione
products
e
available and the different application
e
methods,
infine studiare
and
delle
to
metodologie di
study
applicazione efficaci
effective
e magari andando a
methodologies, intervention
conoscere anche
methodologies.
esperienze di
It's
altri
also important
pregresse,
to
condividendo quindi le
share
esperienze.
experiences with, of course,
Parenti
other
più
experts.
prossimi alle nostre pitture murali contemporanee sono appunto i dipinti
The
murali
ancient
che
traditional
sono
wall paintings
caratterizzati
are
generalmente da una
characterized
realizzazione in
by
ambienti comunque più protetti rispetto
preparation in more protected environments.
come
They
sono
are often
sull'interno
indoors and
e
they
sono anche
are
caratterizzati
characterized
da
by
successioni di
a use
materiali
of materials
consolidata dalla
consolidated
trasmissione, per
by
cui
tradition.
alte via via più sottili, come nel
So it can be,
filter
for
per raccogliere la
example,
pittura, e
fine
nel caso
grains, or
dell'affresco
even in
addirittura
case of a
è
fresco,
inglobata
it is even
nell'intonaco
embedded
del
in
processo di
plaster,
carbonazione, o anche quando ci sono finiture a
or
secco,
even when you have
appunto il tempo
dry
ha consentito agli
finishes.
artisti anche di
Over
conoscere
time,
questi materiali,
artists
conoscere
got to
addirittura
know this
il modo di
material
invecchiare, quindi
and even
prevederne
how they
anche le
age.
proprietà. Diversa è la situazione per appunto i
The situation is
nostri
different
murali,
for our
che sono
contemporary wall
caratterizzati
paintings because they are
da una
characterized
successione, un
by
assemblaggio polimaterico,
an
diciamo,
assembly
di
of
materiali
several
più
materials.
variegati, per cui
So
abbiamo dei supporti
we have, for example, several supports, stone,
molto
brick,
diffuso l'uso del
cement
cemento,
is
che
very common.
ma troviamo anche
But we
coesistenti
also find, for example, metal and wood or even plastic.
pensiamo
If you consider the urban solid works that
questo per quanto riguarda il
were
supporto.
presented yesterday.
Chiaramente l'esposizione in ambito urbano
The
espone a
exposure
queste
to
opere
urban
a
environments, of
climatiche
course,
estreme che aiutano
imply the
e,
exposure to
e
weather
quindi
conditions, even extreme weather
anche i
conditions.
prodotti
So
sulle
the
superfici
products on the
storiche,
painting
non
surfaces,
essendo relativamente al tempo vita di aspettativa di un'opera d'arte,
since they are
pensati
not
spesso
often
come
conceived
prodotti per belle arti, magari pensiamo ai prodotti per
specifically
l'utilizzazione
for
concetto
fine
di
arts.
arte
If you
abbastanza
consider
lontano
products used in the construction industry, in the building industry, the
tipo di opere pensate
average
come
duration of such products is usually 20 years. And so you have to consider the type of products that are used in this
pensare anche
creation of
se
artworks. And so
interessata
this
a
shall
utilizzare delle metodologie, dei prodotti, abbassare
allow
gli
us to
sconti,
change
no? Perché
our
secondo
attitude. And
questa
so
trasformazione.
even if you consider a low resistant product.
Ecco, vediamo quindi
So you
l'infinito
see
mondo dei
the
supporti
never-ending
per
world of
realizzare
support
queste opere
and the
le
different
tipologie di
types
degrado
of
che si
degradation
manifestano
that appear on the color, for example.
Vediamo anche che ci sono delle
Sometimes you
inclusioni
have
molto spesso,
inclusions
perché è ovvio che
because, of
opere
course,
pensate come dire, ci sono elementi metallici, per esempio, vediamo
in
questi
some
armadienti che vengono inclusi
artworks, you
perché
find, for
vengono
example,
coperti,
metal
sommersi dal colore
objects that are included in the
o
work,
ancora
or
appunto soprattutto per le opere
in
quelle
particular,
d'intenzione
this is true for spontaneous
dettate
artworks
dall'intelligenza
that
comunicativa o
are
dalla disponibilità dei
created
numeri,
based
quando
on
vengono realizzati su
will to
supporti
communicate
che
something to the world. They
già
are
presentano dei
created on
degradi propri
supports that maybe are already
e poi
degraded,
passano a
and then,
secondo piano rispetto
of
appunto
course,
appunto,
the main goal is to communicate for these
tranne
artworks.
quando le lacune o il degrado diventano strumento
Sometimes
plastico pittorico, allora lì
the
sì,
degradation
interessano
also becomes a painting tool, so to say.
il colore non da meno.
Color as well has its problems.
Al di là dei
So
materiali,
aside the
delle componenti, anche la
materials
stratificazione
composing
che
it, even the
si
layering,
fonda nel fatto di essere dipinti in spazi
since they
pubblici,
are, of
conta
course,
conseguenze.
works
Oppure, non so,
in
possiamo
public
trovare anche
spaces, this can
degli
cause
elementi
its effects.
pregressi,
Or we can
manifesti,
find, for
stickers, sì,
example,
molti vengono vestiti
stickers,
dalla
posters
pittura
that
e
are
che poi
covered with painting,
deteriorizzano,
and then
si
they
staccano e si
are
manifestano.
they undergo polymerization, and then they detach
Diverso è
and
il
flake out.
contesto che abbiamo analizzato noi e
The
generalmente il
context
contesto
we analyzed in the
dicevo,
Capus
è il
project
contesto delle opere commissionate, dove
is the context of
proprio per
commissioned
magari anche una
artwork.
maggior disponibilità
Considering
economica e di
probably a higher
tempo,
budget
queste
and
opere sono
time,
realizzate su
these works,
preparando il supporto un po'
including the
come in
preparation
casi
of
più
the
fortunati
support,
proprio
sometimes
preparando il
they
tonaco, come
even
si diceva negli
prepared
antichi,
plaster as it
o perlomeno
used to
stendendo
be
dei
in the ancient
primer che
times,
possono
or
essere
they may be coated primers
bianchi, dei bianconi, delle pitture al
or
quarzo,
quartz paint in order to receive the
eccetera.
painting.
L'altro fattore che
Another factor that
interessante
becomes very interesting
nell'attenzione
in
della
the
comunità
attention of the
alle opere
community to artworks, as Alessandra
aiutano a
Grazia
conservarla.
said
Per cui
yesterday. So this
per
attention
esempio se si guarda dove
enhances the
i
conservation
simboli
of the work itself. So, for example, in the Niguarda mural,
colorate con
and we
dipinti di
said
colore
that
sono state
this
prontamente
mural
coperte dagli artisti stessi, ma anche dalla
was
comunità
defaced
di
with
Niguarda e
insults
dell'altra
and
zona.
swastika
Quindi
symbols, but
notiamo
then the
come la
artists
luce
themselves and the
incidente del
community
sole, come delle
decided to
dipinture, le
repaint
riprese
the mural
eseguite con materiali anche
with
diversi,
different
prodotti
materials.
che a seconda delle necessità del momento
Alessandra
Alessandra ieri
yesterday was
ricordava
mentioning,
vedete
here
qua
you
queste
see the
nuvole,
clouds
il tempo
of the
stampato
picture,
del
and
colore verde
Alessandra
quando
was
sono state
mentioning that
riprese
when they repainted the
i rossi come
red
appunto
outlining,
registrare
there was a variable weather.
l'altra cosa che
The
bisogna
other aspect we have
considerare
to
appunto sono le
consider
cause che portano al degrado di questi
concerns the
simboli, e
causes of
possono essere di
degradation.
varia natura.
They
Possono
can
essere
be
legati
linked to the
all'applicazione
location,
magari
if it's
esterna,
inside or
ma anche
outside,
all'orientamento, quindi se a nord
the
magari l'esposizione
orientation,
diretta
if
al
it's
sole, a sud invece
south
dove si possono
or
sviluppare
north,
microorganismi o essere soggetti
directly
a
exposed to
stessi
sun rays,
nelle parti basse o se
or
invece
if
sono
they are
eccetera, o esposti
protected, for
alla pioggia.
example, by ceilings, or if they are open and
I
exposed
fattori
to rain.
ambientali sono interessanti
Environmental
considerare
factors
questo
are
fenomeno.
really interesting.
I fattori antropici,
Anthropic
ovvero
factors, So the fact of living in a shared environment and context leads to
ad atti di
vandalism actions or the non-recognition
e poi anche i
of the
materiali
work.
costituenti
And then
propri
constituent materials as well are very important. So, as I said before, the conservation status of the support, the nature of painting materials.
storici, molto spesso appunto
Sometimes you have organic films on inorganic support, so you have an interaction between different materials
le casistiche.
with the relevant effects.
Appunto la collocazione
So the location, inside or outside, this becomes crucial because even constituent materials and our consolidating materials depend on the weather conditions and the environment conditions.
per cui sia i cicli
So,
stagionali, ma anche
for example,
temperatura, umidità
the season
avere dei comportamenti
cycles or thermal excursions. This, of course, have an impact on our pictorial film, on our painting film, or, for example, stickers.
ecco l'umidità
And then you find environmental factors, you find humidity,
responsabili maggiori
which plays an essential role in the degradation process because it has an hydrolysis effect and it can
modi, quindi per infiltrazione,
be
condensazione, dilagamento,
it can be created by infiltration, capillary rise, condensation, status transitions. So, for example, to freeze, turn into ice, and therefore increase the volume of the plasters. And humidity is also the cause of salt migration, and in particular in cement plasters, salts are really present.
la
The temperature
che ha un'influenza fondamentale
temperature has a strong influence on relative humidity, and then you have other factors that accelerate degradation. So temperature, of course, impacts on the frosto and the seasonal cycles.
la luce anche
Light as well,
molto presente e non schermabile all'esterno con le sue
and
lunghezze
its wavelengths. So you
l'irraggiamento,
have irradiation, the production of heat through infrared, which could be localized or even partial. So you have the sunlight moving on the surface of the work, therefore heating up some parts of the work, or the ultraviolet rays plus oxygen, therefore generating photooxidation. And of course, with all the relevant effects.
l'ossigeno che appunto
So oxygen, together with the UV, it creates a photooxidation. And sometimes you also have the auto-oxidation effect, so at dark. And then you have pollutants, which can have a chemical action on constituent materials.
per esempio l'anidride solforosa che trasforma
You have, for example, a transformation of calcium carbonate
che ne so, le resine
or the epoxy resins
magari abbiamo usato per un impermeamento di una
used maybe in detached plaster, pollutants that are on the powder that you find on surfaces, thanks to humidity, they can represent kind of moisture packs on our artworks. And then the metabolic action of the microorganism, as you can see in this picture, or the physical action on the different media. So humidity can go through capillary rise. Maybe it doesn't come out in the bottom, but it can come out in transpirating plasters, so you have a flaking of the painting itself. Humidity can also be caused by infiltration, or you see by this piping that maybe are not well cleaned and maintained, and so some maintenance actions can help us in preserving these works.
Scusate, forse sto andando un po' veloce per la traduttrice.
Humidity can also create condensation on surfaces, and this is true in particular on surfaces having different porosity. You can see it, for example, on the left. You see how some areas are wet compared to others, and you also have to consider this when you will apply, for example, the plaster, the stucco work. You have to have an homogeneity of the plaster, even when you apply epoxy coats, of course, because even if it rains, they are not subject to humidity for their nature, or the rinsing action. For example, acrylic dispersion on the surfaces with the additives included that can be removed by rain, therefore weakening our films. This image of Canevari, where I met Simone. Here you see the artist using demolition as the painting tool. And then the salt action, in particular included in cement plasters, they often include iron structures, iron casts, because they are often oxidized, and therefore there is a recrystallization of salt between the layers of the plaster. So you have the adhesion, the cohesion phenomena caused by the presence of salt. And then we have the anthropic factors. Here we can see, for example, marks left by skateboards, or you see the tags on this wall painting, outdoor wall painting. So the human action in particular happens when the work of art is not recognized by the community. And so you can also maybe have carelessness or superimpositions or even vandalism.
Adesso prendiamo in esame
Now
invece
let's
i
consider
fattori da considerare
the factors that we have to consider
quello che
for our consolidation purposes.
Chiara prima o
As Chiara was saying before, the distinction between cohesion and adhesion.
ecco,
On
sull'adesione
adhesion,
noi dobbiamo, che è proprio la mancanza di
so loss of adhesion between two different layers, we have to ensure an anchoring capacity and, of course, compatibility between the two different materials. So let's think about organic material on inorganic support, and then the filling capacity of our adhesive, therefore filling a gap. And then we have the cohesion, which considers and which concerns just one layer. So our adhesive shall re-aggregate the different particles. We have to pay attention when this decohesion is on the surface, and you have to consider the optical parameters and no color of the adhesive when applied, even after aging. And the refractive index shall not change except when it loses some brightness. And so when we saturate the porosity, we shall avoid any excess in glossing. During consolidation, we have to consider other factors that are essential while choosing the adhesive. First of all, the molecular weight. A macromolecule penetrates less than a smaller molecule. And then the glass transition temperature is another significant factor. It determines the characteristics of our adhesive. So low temperature, lower than room temperature, is useful for products having adhesive properties. If I want to use the same product for a surface protection, it shouldn't be gummy or chewy, because otherwise they attract dust. So it shouldn't be sticky at room temperature. It is very important to consider the minimum filming temperature, characterizing in particular water dispersion, where below this minimum filming temperature you do not have coalescence. So molecules dispersed in water do not aggregate, therefore they do not form an adhesive film. pH must be considered also based on the media on which we have to intervene. And also on the release of acetic acid and vinyls over time. So it's important to know the components. For example, solution resins, while the dispersion resins, they also include other substances that are not commercially declared that might have an effect anyway. And then chemical stability and compatibility, the influence on the mechanical properties of the system, in particular if you have specific
va
interventions,
scelto un adesivo se ha magari la possibilità di essere applicato con
maybe
solventi
you
diversi,
can
possono
select an adhesive that can be applied with
condizionare
different
la
solvents,
viscosità, per esempio, la
which
permeabilità,
can
e
impact
va
on
scelto un
viscosity, for
adesivo in
example, or
base più
wettability.
che all'efficacia,
You
in
also have
funzione
to
alla
consider the
quantità
adhesive
percentuale di
based
prodotto, cioè
on
parità
the
di concentrazione
percentage
di un
amount of
adesivo,
product and the
funziona
concentration,
meglio
of
o
course, because
funziona
if
meno.
it is the correct
La
adhesive,
temperatura
you
di
have to
applicazione,
use it in a
appunto, che per le resine termoplastiche per esempio,
lower
la
quantity.
temperatura
The
ha
application
un'influenza
temperature,
anche sulla TG.
temperature of course
L'uso
impacts on the
di
TG,
applicazione possibile del
the
prodotto,
possible
se
application methods,
eccetera,
spray
la
or
facilità d'uso
in a different
e la
way, ease
costanza
of
di
use, the
risultato,
consistency
anche
of results,
indipendentemente dall'operatore
regardless
che un
the
prodotto
hand,
facilmente
and the operator applying it.
E poi nella modalità di applicazione
Visual
il controllo visivo deve
inspection of the
permettere a questo
intervention is
posso
really important
magari usarlo senza magari una velina, una cosa, vedo subito quello che
because
faccio.
if I can immediately see what I do, this is very important, and the ability to position where needed. So maybe an adhesive that is behind a flake and I'm not applying glue on the surface when I need to have it under the surface.
Nella sua rimozione. E poi l'influenza
And
che ha
in the mechanical influence on the system properties.
no, analizziamo solo
We only analyze the TG right now, we already described it. And I would like to remind that this temperature range, moving from the plastic stages to the glassy one,
scelto e in un ambiente esterno non è così semplice,
should be chosen far away from the room temperature, and outside this is not easy because otherwise the condition variation of our adhesive of course has an interaction with the constituent materials. So you should choose your TG based on the function, if it's a protective or an adhesive function. And TG is also influenced by other factors, the type of polymer, the molecular weight,
plasticizzanti che possono variare
the
la TG e mi raccomando
plasticizing,
cerchiamo di prediligere prodotti che sono plastificati internamente, cioè
and we should choose a plasticizer, internally plasticized products, because otherwise if they are applied on the surface they can be easily removed by a solvent. The choice of solvent also becomes vital when you have to select a product rather than another. For example, the solvent or dispersive capacity compared to the adhesive, changing its characteristics such as viscosity or wetting power, the fact that it adapts to polarity, it can influence volatility or retention, so that our adhesive penetrates where it should and where we want it to penetrate, and then we have to pay attention to the fact that if we are used, when we are used to the different testing for our work, but we also have to carry out studies and tests when we use a solvent, because the polarity and other characteristics have an impact on the work, on the artwork. So we should test the material, the internal materials as well. I can also play with solvents
darà una miglior viscosità e quindi
A compatible solvent can
un adesivo borderline
ensure a
potrà
better
andare
penetration into the
ad
work,
aumentare la
while a
viscosità, quindi
borderline
potrai
solvents
amplificarla,
can
insomma, questa
maybe impact on viscosity or
oppure
the
appunto
volatility of the
variazione
solvent as well.
anche qua va a
It will
condizionare la
impact
penetrazione il fatto che il
penetration,
film non rimanga
or
troppo
if the
appiccicoso
film
sull'inizio.
becomes sticky for a longer time, and
E
so
poi la
on.
modalità
And then the
applicazione, che può essere
application method:
pennello,
brush,
iniezione
injection,
o
or
spruzzo.
spray.
Vediamo che a pennello,
Brush,
per esempio, ecco,
I have
una
a deep
penetrazione profonda,
penetration,
ma il pennello scarica quando viene
but then
appoggiato
you have
questo
the loading
appunto,
or
quindi possa avere
unloading of the
una
brush.
diffusione del
So you
prodotto
can have a
differenziata
different
se si
product
sta
distribution
usando uno
if I'm
strumento.
not good in using my brush.
Ho
I
un'azione
have
sulla
an
superficie, posso avere
action on the
una
surface,
frizione
I can
sulla
have a friction on the
superficie
surface,
che mi può far rimuovere
therefore
degli
maybe
scarti
removing
piccolanti,
some
quindi
flakes
magari
that are
dovrò
not
utilizzare
stable.
una dovrò utilizzare una velina,
And so
come in questo caso, che può essere utilizzata anche per ammorbidire
I might decide
la
decide
siringa
to
per
use, for
veicolare
example,
puntualmente il
this
prodotto,
tissue
o la
paper to
nebulizzazione
remove
invece per
any
avere una
residues,
diffusione
or
più
spray,
superficiale ma anche
or
più
you see,
omogenea.
for a more homogeneous
Oppure
application.
un'applicazione
Or you can have a
parziale,
partial or
generalizzata,
generalized
dunque
application.
parziale, uso meno prodotto
So
dove mi
partial
serve,
means
posso operare
minimum
una
quantity
diffusione
of
localizzata
adhesive,
e generalizzata,
but
posso
you
avere
might
degli
have
eccessi minori.
differentiations, and then you
E poi
have
c'è il tema anche della
the topic of
permanenza
permanence
e della
and removal.
rimozione. Quindi
You
posso
might
avere
have
delle
chemical
trasformazioni chimiche
transformations of
del mio
the
prodotto nel
adhesive
tempo
over
che
time,
può cambiare
thus
la necessità di
changing
usare
the need
solventi più
for
aggressivi
more
rispetto
aggressive
all'iniziale,
solvents compared to the initial ones, and so on. Now I give the
Lascio
floor
la
to
parola a Simone
Simone,
che va avanti
who
sul
will
tema
continue explaining
Sì, allora,
polymers. Can you hear me?
si sente?
Sì,
Ok,
sentiamo bene.
perfetto.
Sì.
Yes,
Allora
we
sì,
can hear you.
si va avanti su questo tema, riprendendo un po' quello che diceva già Davide
So,
Riggiardi, con una breve ripresa dei concetti appunto di
I would like to
poliverificazione e
talk
dispersione
about polymers in
relativi all'applicazione
dispersion, in
e
solution, and
soprattutto
emulsion, and in
alla capacità
particular
di
the penetration capacity,
o rimanere appunto con un'azione interfacciale
if
indipendentemente
they
dalla
have
viscosità
an
nel caso
interface function based
delle
on
soluzioni,
viscosity.
appunto la viscosità
Viscosity
influenzata
is influenced
oltre che
not only by the
sicuramente dalla
solvent but also by
dimensione
the
del polimero
size of the
che andiamo a
polymer
sciogliere, come abbiamo
we
visto
have to dissolve.
nella
During
simulazione c'è poi il
filming, you
processo di
have the
solidificazione
evaporation of the
solvente, nel
solvent,
caso
while
di
in case of
dispersioni abbiamo
dispersion, you
formulazioni
have
più
more
complesse,
complex
inoltre il
formulations.
polimero essendo disperso abbiamo che
And
la viscosità è
viscosity is
influenzata dalla fase
also
di
influenced by
spreading
the
anche
dispersion
diciamo potendo
phase,
aumentare la
and since we can
concentrazione della
increase the
dispersione
dispersion concentration, viscosity remains
piuttosto invariata.
unchanged.
Appunto abbiamo visto che non
We won't
elenchiamo
list
tutti gli
all
additivi che
the
già ha
additives
ripreso ampiamente
that Roberto
Bestetti
Bestetti
ieri.
explained yesterday.
Comunque per indicare appunto quanto
We
in
would
realtà
like
sia
to stress
importante la
how
conoscenza di
important it
queste
is to
formulazioni
know these
e la
formulations
possibilità di diciamo
and the
includere
possibility
la possibilità
to
di
consider
interazione che
also
possano avere
all the
con
interactions
materiali
that
da opera. Allora,
can
abbiamo poi
exist with the work. We
alcuni fattori da
also
considerare
analyze the factors
nel
to be considered
nell'operazione di
during the
consolidamento,
consolidation
fattori delle opere
action.
d'arte, quindi sia in
So they
relazione alla
are
natura dei
related both
materiali,
to the chemical
lavorativi
nature of
prevalentemente, che potrebbero avere
materials,
una
the,
permeabilità diversa,
in exemplum, the
a cui ho correlato
wettability,
appunto molto brevemente
and you
la
have
tensione
the
superficiale,
surface
l'angolo di
tension and the
contatto,
contact angle that are related to it.
e in relazione anche chiaramente alla tipologia dei materiali, quindi diciamo incompatibilità tra il
And then you
prodotti
might have
che
a
noi utilizziamo
compatibility or
e quelli
incompatibility
materiali
with the
delle opere.
materials we use on the work.
Così come
And we
anche il
have to
metodo di
consider the
applicazione
application
incide
method as well,
sulle
because it
proprietà
has an
dell'opera,
impact
quindi
on the work
la quantità
properties.
di
So
leganti
the
o
quantity of binders or
pigmento
pigments
nel caso degli
in
strati
case
pittorici
of
oppure di
the
aggregati nel caso
painting
dei
layers or
intonaci,
aggregates if it's a
determinerà
plaster,
caratteristiche di
and of
porosità
course
e
this
quindi di
will
capillarità
impact
differenti
on the porosity,
e
on
in
the
questo senso
capillarity,
sia
and
un'igroscopicità
this
diversa
of course will
in
lead
termini di
to a
degrado, ma
different
anche di
hygroscopicity,
assorbimento
so a different
differente nei
absorption
confronti delle soluzioni appunto
of the
consolidanti.
consolidating solutions.
Abbiamo visto come sia fondamentale il ruolo appunto
We
dei
saw
supporti
how
che
crucial is
spesso
the
sono marche
support
fittitizie.
roles.
In questo
Could
caso
be, for
consideriamo
example,
quanto sia
supporting
importante
mortars
considerare che prima di
before
ripristinare diciamo, i problemi di adesione
solving the adhesion
che
problems
sono così diffusi, è
that are
importante
usually
mettersi
pretty
con
common. It is
strati
important to
la
work on
cui coesione
layers
sia stata ripristinata
after
recentemente.
restoring their
E quindi abbiamo
cohesion.
fatto un po' alcuni esempi
So
di
here you
prodotti che si
find
possono
some
trovare
example
nel
of
restauro di
products
questo
that
tipo di
you
materiali.
might encounter while
Partiamo
restoring
appunto
this material. So
dai più
starting from
comuni,
the common
ad esempio abbiamo
ones,
indicato il silicato di
we
etile con una serie
indicate
di
the
precisazioni
ethyl silicate
riguardo
with a set
il
of
suo utilizzo, quindi
indications for their
il fatto
use.
che sì, possa essere sfruttato per solegarsi
It
con la
could be
componente dei silicati, delle malte,
binded to
tuttavia il
the
suo
different
procedimento
mortars,
di
but the
policondensazioni
polycondensation procedures
molto
is
lungo che
very
richiede
long.
alcune
It
settimane,
even
3-4
needs
settimane
3-4
e
weeks.
la necessità di avere
The need
condizioni di
for
temperatura e umidità
appropriate
ben
temperature and
determinate
humidity
complica il suo
values.
utilizzo anche proprio nella
This,
fase
of
pratica.
course, makes
Per questo motivo abbiamo indicato altri prodotti
the procedure more
che sono
complex.
intervenuti,
And
diciamo,
then
più
we also
recentemente, che sono i
included
materiali
other
nanostrutturati,
materials like
in
the
particolare i
nanomaterials, the
nanospersori di ossido
dispersion
di
of
calcio,
calcium
e poi
dioxide,
vedremo anche quelli di
and we
nanosilice.
also
Per
see
quanto riguarda le nanocalci, appunto, interverremo
we
sulla
will
componente
act
legante
on the
a calce in questo caso.
binding component
In generale le
that
nanodispersioni
is
ci consentono una
lime
maggior
based.
penetrazione
In
data la
general,
dimensione
nanoparticles
ridotta delle particelle
allow us a better
ehm,
penetration thanks
e
to
nel
the small
contempo
size of
ci consentono
particles,
di
and at the
rispettare
same time
diciamo, la
they
compatibilità
allow us
chimica
to
e
respect
fisica
the
con
physical and
il
chemical
materiale.
compatibility with the
Anche in questo
material.
caso appunto nanosilici.
Here
Anche
as
qui dovremmo
well you have
precisare diciamo, i
nanoparticles
problemi dovuti
of
alla presenza di
silica.
sali e di umidità
Here you
che
find some
inibiscono
salts,
in
of
questo
course,
senso il
inhibiting
procedimento di
the
azione dei
action
nanosilici, per
of
cui sempre
nano
affiancare
particles of
alla
silica.
possibilità di utilizzo di
So
questi
you
materiali
always have to
all'intervento
use these
preventivo
materials, but also
sui parametri
after
ambientali.
intervening
Abbiamo poi
on the
indicato
environmental
i
parameters, and
materiali per
then
la
we
riadesione
listed
degli
the
strati
materials for
del
the
supporto.
reattachment of detached layers.
Abbiamo indicato la possibilità di eseguire dei piccoli
You
punti di
can
ancoraggio
create
con
some
dei polimeri
small
con
anchor
una capacità
points
adesiva
with
più
the
alta,
polymers
come ad
having
esempio
a
i
higher
liposilici,
adhesive
mentre
capacity,
la
like
capacità
epoxy polymers,
additiva in
while
questo senso
the
dei
filling
vuoti tra gli
action
strati
of the gaps
l'abbiamo
between the
riservata
layers
ai materiali
is
inorganici come le malte
reserved to
d'iniezione,
inorganic binders,
chiarendo sempre una
and they
affinità
are
stretta con i
in
leganti.
close relation with
Anche qui,
binders.
vabbè, abbiamo
Here you see
indicato
some
i prodotti
epoxy
epossilici.
resins.
Ecco, qui invece indichiamo qualche esempio
Here
a
you
titolo
have
indicativo di
some
malte di iniezione.
examples
Sono
of
distinte in
mortars.
ordine di
They
diciamo,
are
granulometria, cioè di
listed
spessore,
based on
che
their
possono andare a
thickness, also their
riempire a
granulometry,
seconda appunto della
based on
granulometria degli aggregati e sono comunque sempre a base di
their
leganti
thickness.
organici.
And as
Per
for
quanto riguarda i
polymers,
polimeri,
We decided to exclude the vinyl part because in particular for dispersion there were problems with their acid pH, both as for supports and colors. So we opted for the acrylic polymers in solution in this case. They are or acrylic derivatives polymers. You have metacrylic or butyl derivatives. In particular, we wanted to focus on the elastic component. So butyl derivatives are more elastic while stiffer in the acrylic ones. In particular, solvents for you can use aliphatic solvents, hydrocarbon aliphatic solvents that can help us in case of sensitivity of solvents. This study was made by Wolvers during a conference, so the possibility of planning consolidant features already existing on the market with the plastification action. In this case, it was paraloid B72 with the aquazole effect, therefore increasing its flexibility in case we need a flexible nature. We have to add a flexible characteristic to our adhesive. As for the dispersion, we have acryl 33 or Plextol. We highlighted micro emulsions because you see the average diameters of particles is lower, and so this allows us a great penetration in colors and in media because we see that we also consider the different supports, and as aging we saw that good results were obtained with these substances. As for dispersion acrylic derivatives, we named some butyl derivatives having a higher viscosity and with a lower filming temperatures. So products allowing us to have a greater flexibility. As for Funori, it's the use of this polysaccharide in some literature documents of wall painting. This product allows us to be respectful in the matting of the painting layers and a good permeability as well. And we have to stress the sensitivity of this material with the relative humidity. So we now see the case studies of Capus project in the World Project 4. This is the first case study with the University of Turin, La Venaria Reale. We carried out tests on some mock-up samples and we simulated the environmental conditions of an outdoor wall painting. We had different problems of consolidation of films, of the substrate, of the mortar, and re-adhesion in some cases of painting flakes or stratigraphy flake and concrete, or to the support or to another layer. So we prepared some mock-ups and we applied mortars of different mixtures in order to simulate different mechanical characteristics on the aerolam substrate, and then we applied colors on the substrate. We decided to respect the real conditions, so acrylic and alkyd colors, and then we prepared loose flakes for the re-adhesion tests, and then mock-up samples were exposed to weather conditions for 3 days, and then we tested the product, in particular two dispersions, Primal B60 and E411. Primal B60 and E411 and microacryl were used to consolidate the color, so injection or with brush. As for the color consolidation, the Primal B60 had worse results in terms of gloss variation compared to 411 because the gloss remained unchanged with this one, while the microacryl had poor adhesive power because it was too penetrating. As for the support consolidation, was tested with the sponge method in compliance with the standard. In this case, B60 and E411 showed better penetration by using the micro emulsion K52 because it's an hydroalcoholic solution and probably it lowered the surface tension, therefore enhancing the penetration of dispersions. And then the results were tested with on-site tests, and on the memorial to the ThyssenKrupp tragedy, and we saw that 411 had a good adhesive power with low gloss variation. For a higher adhesive power and viscosity to the E411, we added Clusel G, cellulose ether, which increased the adhesion of the product. The second case study of the CAPUS project, in cooperation with the Warsaw Academy of Fine Arts, different on-site tests were carried out after analyzing the constituent materials, outdoor murals, performed with different painting techniques on lime and sand, and the support was in bricks. Tests were carried out on site. For color re-adhesion, we first used Primal AC33, so acrylic dispersion. We also tested ammonium caseinate in a hydroalcoholic solution, and the result showed better ammonium caseinate to re-adhere color mortar flakes to the substrate, so more compatibility, and they both had a good adhesive power. As for the support consolidation, two mortars were tested, Leiden PLMA, and result that the Leiden mortar had better characteristics. And now I give back the floor to Davide, continuing with the MAP case studies. So we are at the end of our speech time. I would like to leave time to the other speakers. So thank you all for your attention.
Grazie
Thank you,
Simone,
Simone.
grazie
Thank
Davide.
you, Davide.
Della vostra interessantissima
A very
presentazione.
interesting presentation.
Ora più che altro dobbiamo lasciare il tempo anche alla traduttrice di
So now
fare
we
la
have
necessaria
to
pausa.
stop for
Quindi
a
ci fermiamo
10-minute
per 10
break,
minuti
and then
e poi
we come back
riprendiamo
with
con
cleaning,
cultura
the cleaning speech
con la
by Ilaria
presentazione di Ilaria
Saccani.
Saccani. Le domande
If you
che
have questions,
eventualmente i partecipanti stanno incominciando a
if you
formulare
have
nella propria
questions,
mente,
you can
potete incominciare a raccoglierle nell'icona
start
domande e risposte,
writing them in
in modo tale
the
che poi dopo
Q&A
l'intervento di Ilaria Saccani
box, so that
daremo il
after
tempo
Ilaria's speech
a Simone e a Davide
we
anche di
can
rispondere sul volo.
start our Q&A, so
Eventualmente magari
Davide,
sarà più
Simone, and
occasione per
Ilaria
chiudere
can
quello che non siete riusciti a
answer
raccontarci ora.
to
Purtroppo il tempo
participants'
è
questions, and
limitato
maybe
e le
you
cose da dire
can
sono tantissime e
sum
ci
up. You
dispiace
can
perché sarebbe
end.
Importantissimo questo che
It's
meriterebbe
a
un
very
dedicato,
difficult topic, so we
abbiamo provato a
wanted to
tagliare,
cut and to
ma
shorten our presentation, but it's a very, very
infatti
complex, a
intervento che
very
se ci sarà tempo
long
domani racconteremo nei casi studio,
topic.
se no lasceremo lo
We
spazio
will
anche agli altri
also
casi
see
di
other case
essere
studies
così.
tomorrow.
bene.
Thank you.
Ok,
So
grazie.
see you
Allora
in
ci
10
vediamo tra
minutes.
10 minuti. Bentornati.
Welcome back.
Lasciamo lo
We give
spazio
back
ora
the
di
floor
nuovo
to
ai
Ilaria
Saccani,
Saccani,
che vi ho già presentato e che ci farà l'ultima lezione
who
della
will present
di
the
questa
last lecture
mattinata,
of this morning session,
raccontandoci
talking
del
about
tema della
cleaning
cultura dei
contemporary
tempi
wall
morali
paintings.
contemporanei.
To you the floor, Ilaria.
Prego, Ilaria.
Sì, grazie. Un attimo perché ho il computer che non so cosa ha avuto
Just
problemi
one
tecnici, per
second,
cui
because
un
I'm
attimo.
struggling with my computer.
Mi confermate che state vedendo?
Yes, we can see it.
Bene.
Good morning and welcome back. In this module, we will enter the area of the cleaning tests.
All'interno di essi
Within them, we'll try to clarify or review some chemical and operational characteristics of the methods used,
usate, ma senza voler entrare nei particolari,
in particular to emphasize their benefits and limitations, and in particular for a critical view of what was done.
partiamo quindi dalla
Let's start with the Niguarda Antifascista mural.
in questo caso proprio per i test
I would like to thank Chiara Fabbri for all the mock-up tests. This table summarizes what has been done in relation to the removal of surface dirt and the superimposed materials with dry and aqueous method, so water method.
trasmissioni, se vogliamo, quindi degli imbratti.
Let's now see the methods used that
Utilizzata, che avete già visto più volte
we already discussed.
quindi diciamo prima una
So sampling and then characterization through the different analytical techniques that were already
chiarimento della
discussed,
sequenza stratigrafica e della composizione dei materiali.
and then the mock-up preparation after the composition and structure of the artwork. In this case, pre-formed concrete blocks,
Formati con appunto
and we applied
un primer
a quartz-based primer and 2 other painting coatings, one with water dispersion and another one was the Montana Bright Red spray can. And then we carried out cleaning tests, so dry cleaning and aqueous methods. And then there was an artificial dirt application, what is mentioned in the literature by Ormsby et al. So let's start with the dry cleaning methods and the project of the RCE in Amsterdam in order to stress the conditions and to highlight the conditions. So this project was carried out on specific support the fact that some contemporary surfaces demonstrated a sensitivity to both aqueous and solvent environments, making dry method the only possible way forward. The critical points were then underlined, and so you had the mechanical action, so the change in the surface morphology, and the risk of leaving residues in terms of particulate matter, and in particular, even of greater risk, chemical residues. So the aim of the project was to relate the cleaning power of the methods under consideration, after characterizing them by understanding their intrinsic criticalities with respect and in relation to the surface morphology. So alongside the RCE Amsterdam project, another project was developed by Cersmar 7 with the University of Parma and with the University of Turin. We tested not only oils but also acrylic surfaces. The evaluation of both tests, both projects, was carried out with an analytical characterization of dry cleaning products, and in particular thanks to radar diagrams, Kvyat ones, we considered the cleaning power, the surface, and the gloss factor, and the risk of residues and their removability. To which you have other factors such as the maintenance of the UV fluorescence, because we were talking about oils, so the conservation of the scheme of medium that we find in contemporary oils and the stability of aging. We then apply the superficial dirt, and the composition is in the literature. In particular, you see here the literature we refer to. In our case, it was sprayed. We then consider the results on Niguarda mock-up samples. We summarize the test on the dry cleaning materials. All the criteria are listed here. And we selected 4 criteria already used in Amsterdam. and we added the method feasibility and the pigment pickup. So the loss of pigment. The best results obtained with this test were possible thanks to the smoke sponge with its large porosity and regular violation boundary has an optimal action in collecting dirt. Other effective results were then that of the magic sponge, which however was not characterized, so we should further characterize it, and the makeup sponge, even if the Montana red tends to lose some particles, probably due to the color intrinsic characteristic when applied in a spray can. Let's now move to the aqueous methods, the water-based methods on the same mock-up tests, mock-up samples. So on the Niguara Antifascista mock-ups, they were prepared by using spray cans, Montana 94 red, modified alkyl resin, and Sickens acryl matte paint. So styrene acrylic based color. And the main concern with the use of a water-based method was to protect the acrylic coating. So the adjustments in pH and conductivity values were in particular driven by considerations of protecting this type of coating. We then tested the listed solutions which focus on specific values of conductivity and pH, and they were also added with surfactants and chelating agents. The most effective solution was applied by using a microfiber cloth and makeup sponge and gelled with the agar. So let's now see what were the methods used and why. So in order to minimize swelling of the acrylic-based pictorial layer, you can use on several aspects like conductivity, you can act on viscosity, on chelating agents, surfactants, but also you can have supportants, that is to say semi-humid methods. And this was to minimize swelling and extraction of additives, but also to maximize the cleaning power. So let's start by choosing the appropriate pH. As we know, inside traditional paintings, pH is specifically chosen in a range of manufacturers. So here you see the different support and the different medium and its action on the oil. We also know that the solutions that are applied are buffer solutions, so they can leave the pH unchanged when touching the surface of the work. Buffer solution, based on the experience over time, we know that a buffer solution is a solution which sees a pH that is consisting of a mixture of a weak acid. So you have pH and pKa. We know that this condition is a strong balance to which the solution tends to go back. So when contacting the surface, if this varies the pH, so the solution is to go against this trend. As for the acrylic surfaces, pH control and the relevant values included in the literature are primarily aimed at minimizing swelling and so ionization of polyacrylic acids and the polyanionic species that are included in formulations as dispersing agents. So in the fully unionized state, the polyacrylic acids in the free acid form are virtually insoluble and exist in the form of a gumball, but since the pH that was prepared exceeds the pKa of the polyacrylic acids, the ionized polymer rapidly changes and expands, therefore resulting in swelling of the film. So you have an increase in the size, and sometimes it cannot be controlled over the acrylic surface. So to stick to what I've just said, we should have a pKa that is lower of the polyacrylic acid, but it's really acid, and so it is incompatible with other substances. So you should have a pH 6, which is a good compromise between what I've just said and to respect the pigments. Conductivity is another matter. Ionic concentration and conductivity represent a crucial parameter for the cleaning action as for acrylics and the safety of the cleaning action. We know that this is fundamental to minimize the osmotic phenomenon that can be established if the conductivity of the solution differs much from the surface being the object of the cleaning. So if you have an hypertonic solution, so that with a higher concentration compared to the surface, or other risky phenomenon of swelling, uncontrollable swelling, in case of hypotonic solution, so more dangerous. So this parameter becomes crucial, and we have to apply the hypotonic solutions. The protection of surfaces is possible thanks to hypotonic solutions, and by this we mean solutions having values up to 10-20 times greater than those measured, in order to avoid any damage. So recently the conductivity value has been recalculated, so from 6 to 10 millisiemens per centimeter. So it's a rule of thumb that must be followed. But it may not work all the time, but anyway it allows us to measure the surface. So if this range of conductivity is not effective, you can vary it and you can test it before the hypertonic solution. So you tend to increase the value to increase the cleaning power, but also because the hypotonic solution, as we said before, is much more dangerous.
Come avrete
As you
visto,
probably saw,
abbiamo anche
we
inserito
included
quei
surfactants
la
such
serie
as the
EH6,
EcoSurf EH, in particular EH6.
Si tratta di
They are surfactants that were selected on several studies on acrylics, in particular Tate AXA project and the workshop on cleaning of acrylic painted surface. They are by Dow Chemicals, and the characteristics of these surfactants are in particularly appropriate on contemporary surfaces, non-ionic surfactants, ethoxylated, propoxylated, biodegradable. They have an excellent wetting and emulsifying capacity, and they are easy to dissolve, and they can be easily rinsed. And we chose the intermediate HLB. And of course, you can also effectively prepare some microemulsions. We also talked about applying solution with a microfiber cloth, in particular Avalon. Why? Because in this case, considering the structure, the texture of the microfiber, you can combine the effectiveness of the solution chosen with the absorbing power of the microfiber, because it can trap the dirt in its structure, in its texture, but also water. And for lower grams, you reach 400% of its weight of water, and even more with dirt. And then another test was carried out with a makeup sponge in polyurethane ether that are the most effective on dirt, and with a fine granulometry, and they trap any dirt. And in particular, the one in TDI, they respect the surface because they have a very smooth structure. Let's now consider the choice of testing gelling agents, in particular the xanthan gum, so the direct gelling material. Why this xanthan gum? We know it's a polysaccharide coming from a bacteria fermentation, and its characteristic is to a negative charge molecules, therefore disanchoring dirt. It's a structure, you see it of the gel. You have the first formation of helix, and then you have helix rods, and they in the end form this structure, this so that's why we chose the xanthan gum, because it has an effect of the mechanical shear on the rheology, so shear sensitive gel for its pseudoplasticity, so the variation of viscosity in relation with the mechanical shear that was applied. And this was fundamental to get into the pores of the paint layers, which of course has wide porous structures due to its application on the concrete blocks. We also tested the agar gel that you all know, both in the fluid form and in its stick forms, semi-solid, so solid, to understand what was the best form to remove the dirt. So you have semi-solid agar and stick agar that for its due to its form it can slide on the surface to be cleaned. In its stick form, it's always related to the molecular sponge. Let's consider the results of the test of the aqueous method on the mock-up samples. So you see the parameters here. They were also considered for the dry cleaning method, and the solution that ensured the best result is the one with the pH 6 and 20 ms per centimeter, so hypertonic solution, was able to clean out the dirt but respecting the surface. If you add the xanthan gum, you can better reach the macro porosity of the material, therefore enhancing the cleaning action. Another method was to apply the solution with a sponge, a makeup sponge, and this of course increases the cleaning power. So between Evolon and makeup sponge, the best solution was for sure this latter, so the makeup sponge. Agar was effective in a fluid form but not in stick, because it was grated on this surface, therefore leaving residues. So let's consider now the tests on the Niguarda mock-up samples. As for defacing substances, so with a solvent-based method, the overpaintings, in particular, were Nero d'Inferno ink, the Molotov marker, and 3 spray products, one by Molotov, one black, one silver, and one violet. Considering the solvent and the solubility test, we isolated 2 mixtures, the effectiveness of which was not sure, and Le3 gave the best result, even if the Molotov spray can be removed with a Ligreen mixture. We decided to work with mixtures, and we use the microfiber cloth to optimize the extraction action. And they were fundamental propyl carbonate mixtures and Ligreen, and we used also different solvent surfactant gel, and we also used the Velvesil Plus product to produce a specific emulsion. So let's see the propylene carbonate solvent that was used in the text mixtures, in this case, but also in other cases. It's similar. It has a dielectric constant, and it's similar to the methylpyrrolidone that were, of course, banned. That is, it banned for toxicity. And it also volatile organic compounds exempt, and it is used to remove aged resins, and it was also used in microemulsion with polyacetate. Other organic carbonates is the dimethyl carbonate, diethyl carbonate, and you see the parameters that are exposed here. Let's consider the Velvesis Plus Momentive. It's a product that was replaced by Chinexu product, but in this case it was used. It's a gel that can be divided into 3 types of substances. These solvents, so cyclomethicone, decamethyl cyclopentasiloxane. It could be articulated polymers and the polypropoxylate. It has a dispersing action if it is mixed with water more than 10%. It creates a particle emulsion, so it is stabilized by Pickering emulsion particles, and since it can be mixed with polar solvents, except with benzyl alcohol and the solvent-in-solvent emulsion. So let's go back to the test results, so solvent-based methods on the mock-ups of the Niguarda Antifascilta. So the best mixtures were the La3 and La3, swelling of overpaintings, and the faster result can be obtained with the solvent surfactant gel number 3. And the application with microfiber cloth, in this case, it doesn't give good results because it requires several applications, therefore altering the situation. While the propylene carbonate mixture are more effective in case of higher percentages of propylene carbonate, in particular from 25 to 75% of PC, or only PC alone. So let's now move to the cases on the mock-up test, starting from the works in Via Sella e Via Candelù in Reggio Emilia. Same pathway that was followed, the study of the cross-section, and then up to the mock-up preparation based on the stratigraphy that was detected. And then we applied overpaintings in 2 ways. So during this first analysis, we will see the application of overpaintings in 2 types of color: Montana 94 light yellow, so an alkyd modified, and Montana Gold pure orange, so nitroacrylic. On these 2 types of colors, we applied 4 types of overpainting, so Montana Colored Matte Black, Montana Cans Gold Silver Chrome, and 2 markers. One is a permanent marker and the other is a blue squeezer. The solvent-based methods can be gathered into 3 groups. So we tried solvents and solvent mixtures in liquid form, micro-emulsions in liquid form, and gels as well. thickeners and supporting agents.
agenti supportanti. Accanto
Close to the solubility test, we added other solvents to different solubility parameters, the ones included in literature that are effective on filmogen materials. So esters, ketones, propylene carbonate, once again, benzyl alcohol, and other solvents. So the basic esters and two recent solvents is solvenon DPM, loxanol. A low toxicity alternative to replace the methylpyrrolidone as a paint remover. So the basic esters are mixtures of glutaric acid, succinic acid, and adipate acids, and they are considered as green as they are biodegradable, low toxicity, and low VOC, but with a very good solvent power. And they were tested because they were considered as suitable for these cases, thanks to their solvent power. They have low volatility and low miscibility in water. Inside, within the tested gels, we also included the polyvinyl alcohol borax gels. They were not mentioned until now, so before analyzing the test results, I would like to specify in detail what they are. They are viscoelastic materials, and they are defined as a high viscosity polymeric solutions, and they combine the characteristics of being easily removed and together with the characteristic of rigid gels, so they can get into the surface like the paste gels. The polyvinyl alcohol is linked with sodium tetrahydroborate dihydrate, so borax, and the characteristic of this gel depends on the length of the chain of the polyvinyl alcohol, the concentration of the components, and on the pH. These gels are highly transparent, stable, and easily removable from the surface.
Senza troppo addentrarci nelle questioni, possono accogliere al loro interno.
They can include a range of appropriate solvents, and so they can be of great help in these cases, and then they have an alkaline pH, and so they are particularly suitable to remove overpaintings or varnishes or in general film forming materials. The last category of products that we would like to explain is the nanostore gels. They are chemical gels based on polyhydroxyethyl methacrylate and polyvinyl pyrrolidone. And since they are highly retentive, they release gradually what they are loaded with. So in this case can be solvents, but also with the cleaning line systems that are divided into nanostructured fluids,
polar coating,
like the polar coating,
risultano per fatto delle oil and water
or the micro emulsion for apolar coating.
polar coating. Per quanto riguarda i risultati,
As for the results on the first set of mock-up samples,
fatti a partire
based on the ritual stratigraphy, they are not aged, so the results of course are limited because they were recently applied, and so the coatings were recently applied, not aged, and so sensitive to solvent action, even if the acrylic alkylic resin was more resistant than the Montana Gold. The best results were obtained with the ethanol,
delle miscele di quelle di
number 16 and number 12,
che sono in realtà a base
based on dibasic ester, loxanol propylene carbonate, and blend 12, dibasic ester, dowanol, and propylene carbonate. Avalon is effective on non-film forming overpainting, so markers, for its extractive action. Velvesis is effective, but it requires mechanical action, and for sure it has better performance on non-filmogenic materials, while on film-forming materials, microemulsions are more effective, in particular if they are applied through the nano restore gel, so high retentive. The gels on PVL borax were effective in swelling the film forming material, so particularly thick, but then you need a mechanical action for removing swollen material that can leave abrasions. On the age samples of the same set, and results are slightly different, in particular with the alkyd overpainting on alkyd colors. And this for sure because they are better anchored, and we can assume an interlayer cross-linking that was even assumed by CCR and Turin team. This is what I've just described to you here. You can see the difference, in particular with the black spray applied on LY. So aside all these details, the approach that must be followed is first of all to have clear in mind the composition of the painting layer, thanks to the analysis and solubility test, the nature of the overpainting material, the chemical nature, solubility, thickness, and the penetrating power for markers, and to investigate if there is any coating or varnish. So in this way you can highlight the best cleaning and blend solution. Other tests were also carried out on the same stratigraphy, but we cross on the overpainting some protective agents. We will describe them tomorrow with Berzioli, even under paints. So Montana Kent's Montana colors, and the Kent varnish gloss, and then here you see the different coatings that were selected and were tested to remove the different overpaintings.
però questa volta con un coating
With an intermediate coating this way, in this case.
sono state pertanto in primis provate
We first tested the manufacturer's recommended products for this specific category of protection, like a high pressure spray or steam or removing products. And we evaluated the effectiveness, and so another step is to evaluate the product proposed by the industry. And then we tested Ligreen ethanol,
quelli che erano stati i test
and we tested the most effective methods on uncoated samples.
e qui sono quelli che abbiamo appena elencato. Diciamo che in generale
So in general, the results obtained
sono che
is that when the coating creates
formi una barriera
an homogeneous barrier,
omogenea e diciamo efficace, allora è chiaro che la pulitura risulta
then the cleaning is more effective. When the coatings are permanent, they also have to offer a chemical barrier against chemical cleaning.
sacrificali, devono essere
Otherwise, they can be removed together with the overpainting. Hexafor has the best result because it creates a continuous, permanent protection, while those which did not create a specific protection, and it's of course in our cases it's not a general evaluation, so it depends on the chemical characteristics of our surface. So in our case, Prostone didn't have a good result because
formando quindi una
the product does not form an homogeneous, a thick layer.
diciamo uno strato che è più difficile da pulire. I coating sacrificali sono removibili con vapore efficacemente,
So
soprattutto ideali
some coatings can be removed with steam, and in particular for non-forming film, like the two markers. So to sum up the results, the best results were obtained with Velvesil ethanol
con etanolo, con Velvesil, con
with high scores. Other good results were obtained with PVA gels, borax, and Nano Restore with micro emulsions. In particular, they were effective for on film forming materials with a high score for Nano Restore gel with micro emulsions, but not for the applicability of the method on vertical surfaces. Wax-based coatings is a good alternative, green and respectful of the service. Of course, you have to balance the application, in particular for not film forming materials. Let's now see
illustrare brevemente un altro
the other tests
test effettuati
that were carried out by the team of the University of Turin CCR. They have been included in a publication that is available, and their focus
focus e quello che volevo mostrare è proprio
is the decision-making method, so how the case was dealt with. The aim of the research was to evaluate through different analytic approaches the effectiveness of the cleaning in a green way to the materials that were overlapping and so being film forming. So after a first evaluation And a first characterization of the materials used with this multi-analytical approach, we evaluated the results of the cleaning with an increase in sensitivity testing technique. Cleaning were on concrete and sand, in contrast colors, with red and green for the removal, and then by alternating the composition. So the first set A and B, you see red styrene acrylic paint, and C and D, you have styrene acrylic on alkyd and alkyd on styrene acrylic, with buffering of the Silo 112 protective coating. And the results of this cleaning showed how these are all the tested methods. As for the results on the samples of the A and B set, in particular on B, so having the same chemistry at the two colors, so alkydic on alkydic, no method tested was effective. And so this is the interface between the two colors. The A set was a little bit better. So results that can be acceptable in a visual way, but not acceptable with some analytical methods. Mixed stratigraphy, so results were better, in particular where you had the protective coating, and in particular the polypropylene carbonate with some change in brightness. The nano restore gel on the uncoated areas cannot be applied on the real case because we have to deal with vertical surfaces, and for their time of application that are very long. So, in general, considering the heterogeneity of the results and materials and of their combinations, the approach should always focus on identifying shared guidelines and common approaches with respect to the use of ready-made formulations. So this is the approach we share with all the Capos teams, in particular for the case studies that we analyzed. And I'm at the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ilaria, for sticking to the time, considering how wide this topic is. So let's continue with the Q&A. And I would like to ask questions to Davide and Simone. If you can please turn on your videos and microphones so that you can participate.
Non riesco... eccolo, non riuscivo a riattivare l'audio.
So the first question is asked by Marina Polizzi, and she's asking if you found differences between dispersion and in-solution consolidating agents Maybe Ilaria can help me later on to give this answer, but the main difference is that the in solution consolidants are solvent based, and so their filming process is linked to the evaporation of the solvent. Even at low percentages, they tend to be highly viscose. And with even lower percentages, they are not so effective. While dispersion consolidants, they are mainly linked to the solvent, so to water. And so you can have a good viscosity even with higher percentages, but it depends on the size of the polymer. While in dispersion, consolidating agents also include additives inside them, and they can photo-oxidize or become yellows or show chemical alteration, degrade the surface, and so on and so forth. The filming process in water dispersion is more difficult because you have the water evaporation, then you have the coalescence. So you have the minimum filming temperature, and maybe the surface dries up quicker while the internal part maybe embeds some water or air bubbles. So maybe you should reactivate this adhesive with heat to improve the film quality. But maybe Ilaria can help me with this answer. I don't know if you have anything to add from a chemical point of view. So you already mentioned all the aspects, because in solution resins you have the limit of concentration, so of penetration, and the interaction of solvents with the painting layer. So it's not easy to combine a potential wide range of products and respecting the surface understudy, considering the peculiarity of these products. And of course, penetration is another matter. As for dispersion products, you have to look for products with tested aging characteristics, because additives, of course, play a fundamental role. For sure, in dispersion formulation, we have other parameters that we must consider, such as the minimum filming temperature. Of course, you have to consider it when you apply the product and the period of time when you have to carry out the treatment. And of course, the pH to stabilize the dispersion. This is another important factor. You excluded vinyl products because they also have other types of problems. Thank you.
Ok, grazie.
Davide and Simone, to conclude on your part,
Non so se volete magari
if you want to add something, because you were not able to conclude your presentation, we wanted to share some practical experiences at the MAP Museum. It's a museum that was created inside the Milan Asylum, so it was an exclusion place, but then thanks to the art it has become an inclusive place. So it's a museum of modern art, an open air and very interesting. And with the School of Restoration, with the Academy of Fine Art of Brera, with the students, we had on-site experiences. We can also maybe discuss about it tomorrow if we have some time left.
Tra i vari interventi rimane il tempo di
Otherwise,
comunque.
we will have other opportunities to discuss about these
Va
cases.
bene, grazie. Ho un po' di
I have
domande
several
per
questions
Ilaria
for
sul
Ilaria about
cronoprogramma.
cleaning.
Allora, la prima
The first question is by Elena Valentin. She asked if the protective coating creates a film, a thick film on humid surfaces. Did you find any deformation or bubbles or accumulations? It's on the protective coating. I will keep this question for tomorrow as for coatings, because tomorrow we will explain how they react on our cases about coatings and protection with Mrs. Berzioli. Will give a detailed answer tomorrow, because we will analyze the different coatings, characteristics, and the different applications. I have just explained them because we had a range of samples with different overpaintings. Of course, coating characteristics are essential to understand why an overpainting can be easily or not easily removed.
Ok, grazie. Allora, poi c'è la domanda di
And then Marina Granero asked,
studiato
did you study any additive included in the makeup sponge, and how can this interfere with the painting surfaces? Yes, we studied them at that time of the dry cleaning project. So in polyurethane ether, we know what's inside, but we also saw that a rule of thumb Mododen and the Amsterdam team suggested is to rinse sponges with demineralized water and leave them to dry before the application. This reduces the risk of leaving residues, but since they are not technical products, the presence of undeclared additives and the variation in the composition would require a continuous analysis. So this is just a small trick to avoid the permeation of antioxidants. We found vitamin E and other substances not linked to the base, the polymer.
Grazie.
Julia Hartman asked another question about dry cleaning.
Sempre. Chiede se avete considerato
Did you consider
di provare
trying the soft particle abrasion?
particle abrasion, cioè un'abrasione con particelle soffici. Dice è stato
It was
sviluppato
developed
per
for
la
paper
conservazione
conservation.
dell'Antartica.
I tested it
E infine
and
consigliato
finally
questa
recommended
tecnica
this technique
per la,
for an
in
indoor
caso di
wall
un
painting.
murale indoor all'interno. È una tesi
It was a master
presso
thesis at the Cologne Institute.
questo per
And
la pulitura
both
sia
for the
della
cleaning of the
superficie dello
surface
sporco,
from
della
dirt,
superficie
but
del dito,
also
anche per
to
rimuovere
remove any
degli strati
additional
soprammessi di
alkyd
resina
paint layers,
in questo caso
modifying
ovviamente
particles
modificando le particelle
based
a
on
seconda
the approach.
del caso.
I don't know if you want. No, we didn't test it. I have heard about it.
Ce ne aveva già parlato, credo che l'avessero menzionato in due frangenti.
My colleague Petra Demot mentioned it during her workshop, but as a topic
che esula ovviamente dal
going outside for the term mending, and
e anche
Frederick Weitig as well mentioned it because she is a part of our partnership since we didn't test it, but it's a great remark and suggestion. So for any further test within the project, we could add this test as well. So thank you for your suggestion. Now we continue with a question by Ambra Giordano. And she says, I think that the temperature of the fluid agar that you applied was about 35 degrees. But based on the scientific studies, this temperature is not ideal for the surfactant because it tolerates only temperatures not higher than 20 degrees. How did you manage? How did you deal with this problem? In case of liquid agar, we wanted to keep the temperature as low as possible, and we applied it right before gelling on acrylic surface. This might create problems. In general, styrene acrylics are less gentle, but for sure the method can be applied to other surfaces within wall paintings, and other types of spray cans might tolerate. So we wanted to test it in this way. But on acrylics, on the second coatings, this is of course a weak point, and so you should apply it in a different form. Thank you. Giulia, for you, Ilaria, a curiosity, were you able to test the laser treatment as a cleaning method to remove overpaintings from different substrates of the urban art? We didn't test it as a CESMA 7 Antares team, but I don't know if you saw it. You can consult the article on the University of Turin CCR. One of the methods tested was the laser one, but of course you have to change the settings. And the result was that this method is difficult when setting the parameters if there is not a protective coating, and if there are residues when you have overlapping materials of the same nature. So the analytical method, high sensitivity, can detect residues, but we didn't test it directly. You can read the essay prepared by the University of Turin CCR. With the students in the museum map, with the help of Ilaria as a chemical expert to remove these overpaintings, we tested it on work of by Dusmaroli, and you saw this image when we were talking about overpaintings, and these overpaintings were removed with a gelling solutions of variable polarity solvents based on the type of substances you have to remove or you have to preserve, and by using the laser treatment. You have to use both methods, because in some cases the laser treatment was better because it's selective over colors, while in other cases solvents were better because they were more selective on binders. So in some cases laser was burning with a high energy on some colors, or maybe it was not effective, and in some other cases solvents worked better. So with this opportunity, we can work where the solvent doesn't make it, so it's an alternative. Thank you.
ci sono ancora un po' di domande, quelle che riusciamo le facciamo, magari ci prendiamo ancora qualche minuto, altrimenti
So we
poi
try
magari
and
proseguiamo
answer to all
domani.
the questions, otherwise we will
Intanto
continue
c'è la
tomorrow.
domanda
So
di
a question by Cristiana
Cristiana
Todoro
che
asking
chiede
if
se
you
sono stati
carried out
eseguiti dei
tests
test per
to
valutare la
evaluate
presenza di residui di
any
gel
gel
negli
residue,
infiltrati e come
and
sia stata
how did
valutata
you
l'eventuale interazione
evaluate the
tra singoli
interaction between
solventi e
cleaning
residui
systems
storici da
and
preservare?
painting layers to be preserved?
Allora, dalla mia slide forse ho corso
It
un
depends on the
po' in sé
cases.
dalle casistiche. Per quanto
As for
riguarda
the
la
first
prima
mock-up
serie di
sample
infiltrati
set,
presentati, sono state fatte delle valutazioni
we use
con
optical
microscopio
microscopy,
assolvente,
while
stereomicroscopio.
in other
Negli
cases
altri casi sono state fatte anche
we
delle
also
altre
conducted our
prove.
tests.
In particolare
In
nella
particular,
struttura ovviamente
in the
presentata
cases
CCR
of the unit CCR, the analytical approach was really precise and detailed.
per quanto
As far as we are
ripeto,
concerned,
sono state essenzialmente
we
fatte
made some characterization from an optical point of view,
ottiche
but not in terms of extraction from the layers.
di questo magari
Michaela, I don't know if she is here. She could help me if I was right in my answer.
sono state fatte
We
soltanto delle
carried out
caratterizzazioni
optical characterizations, right?
Sì, abbiamo
We use
usato lo
the ferromicroscope up to 45 magnification to give a score from 0 to 10 to the parameters you mentioned in order to understand how the morphology was changed or the gloss or other parameters of the surface.
Comunque sì, devo dire che già
Visual analysis sometimes were really promising, but when you zoom in 45 times, the situation did change because these surfaces are hard to clean, and sometimes you found overpainting residues. Maybe you cannot spot them with your eye, but with the microscope you could detect them. So our idea was to make a screening in order to find a safe method. Cleaning is really hard on these large surfaces, so our attempt was not so analytic, was not precise, because we started from scratch.
Comunque una situazione per capire un po'.
So we wanted to understand the most effective materials and solutions. Maybe on the most effective solutions, we could carry out residue analysis with the chemical way. But we wanted to have a more general approach.
quello che ho detto anch'io, ovviamente
The project was really
di conseguenza
wide, had a wide scope, and so cleaning represented a small step inside a wide context. We wanted to create guidelines and to define approach, a general approach.
Grazie. Allora, ci sono ancora delle domande che non sono
There are
sollevate.
several
Io
questions. I
le
would
lascerei a domani.
keep these questions for tomorrow
D'accordo. In modo da
so that we
finire i lavori
can
che abbiamo
conclude
giornato
today's session, if you agree. So
quindi
we will
risponderemo
give you an
direi
answer
domani.
tomorrow, even in the final part. As for the laser, I would like to say that there is a publication on the Chesmer's papers from the oil-to acrylic. It's a page 217. You find the article on overpainting removal caused with spray cans.
Grazie, scusami, possiamo ne tiro via
Two other questions that are easy.
Il tipo e marca di panno
The cloth is the Avalon Freudenberg, and that's the brand, the original one.
Original one. Mentre per quanto riguarda
As for the other organic carbonate,
penso che
the ethylene carbonate was included among the solvents by UNITO, by the University of Turin, but they did not continue the test because the results were not ideal. So propylene carbonate was included, and it's included also in the blends we tested. So that's all. Maybe we can leave the other questions for tomorrow.
Va bene. Vi ricordo sempre che
I remind you that recordings of this webinar will be available at the end of next week or anyway soon. We will notify you through our social media and Cesmar newsletter. So thank you for your participation. Thank you to the speakers and the interpreter and the Granello for the technical support, and see you tomorrow.
domani.
Bye bye.
Arrivederci.